Alpha My Executioner. Omegaverse Werewolf Shifter Romance Audiobook. Written by Reinhardt. Chapter 1 The Omega Who Ran Through Fire. They said the mating ceremony was sacred, that the altar of bonfire, carved from centuries-old ashwood and veined with rune gold, was a gift from the gods, that the Omega chosen for this honor should weep in gratitude when their Alpha pressed teeth to neck and sealed a future soaked in shared blood and purpose. Caelen Merrow felt none of that. He was on his knees, drugged and dizzy, eyes wide and vacant as the towering throne hall spun around him like a carousel of ivory and glass. The polished stone beneath his bare knees had long since numbed his skin, but a dull, persistent throb echoed from the place where the bond cuffs latched around his wrists, spelled silver etched with sigils he couldn't read, forged to hold an Omega in place during ceremony. They hadn't even let him wear white. His robes were red, not ceremonial crimson but an almost vulgar shade, the kind used in bloodletting, thick and ceremonial, layered over his skin until it choked his movement. His collar had been pressed too tight. His scent glands were burning, bleeding their heat into the air like slow poison. And above him stood Commander Nyric Ravell. Caelen couldn't see his face clearly. The serum in his veins made the lights too bright, outlines too thick, but he didn't need to. He could feel Nyric like a shadow lodged in his chest. The room stank of iron and scorched pine, the sharp masculine imprint of the Alpha who had just claimed him in the eyes of the kingdom. Claimed, not mated, not yet. That was what the bite would be for. That would come next. You're lucky, a voice had told him earlier, muffled through the walls of his dressing chamber. An Alpha like Commander Ravell doesn't come along twice. You'll carry strong pups. As if that was all he was made for. A tremor rolled through his belly, not from fear, not only fear, but the fire of the suppressant reversal cocktail now flooding his system. The doctors had called it a quick release. A gentle phrase for a compound designed to ignite an Omega's heat in less than an hour. His skin was starting to burn under his ribs. His mouth had gone dry. His breath came shallow and tight. The priest spoke. Words of the old rite. Something about surrender. Something about destiny. Caelen didn't hear it. All he could feel was the way Nyric approached, one slow step at a time, like he was stalking prey. His boots rang heavy on the ceremonial floor. Caelen's forehead hit the marble, the forced kneel deepening into full prostration. He tasted blood in his mouth and didn't remember biting his tongue. The bonfire behind him roared, sending waves of heat over his back. 100 eyes were on him. Aristocrats, betas, Omegas in training, lined in neat rows to watch him be taken. See how it was done, what their future would look like. Caelen was 17. They said he should be grateful. The moment Nyric hand touched the back of his neck, something in Caelen's body screamed. Not a noise, not a sound. A scream made of memory. His mother's face, tight with resignation. His father's signature on the assignment scroll. The creak of chains when the trainers taught him to kneel. Caelen saw fire. And then he moved. It was a convulsion, not a plan. His arms jerked, bones shrieking against enchanted cuffs, and something snapped. The spell gave before his mind could. He was on his feet in an instant, spinning, breaking through the ring of attendants who hadn't expected resistance. His knees buckled once, but the panic held him upright. He ran. The Omega ran. The court gasped. Someone shouted, "Stop him!" But Caelen was already at the altar steps, already tearing at the collar that dug into his throat. His skin blistered where the fabric rubbed. His claws had come out without conscious thought. Behind him, Nyric growled. Not words, not a command. A pure Alpha snarl, low and territorial, that split the air like a thunderclap. The scent that followed was suffocating. Power, fury, claim. Caelen stumbled but didn't stop. His body had gone past control, heat and terror coiling in his gut like twin serpents. The bonfire pulsed ahead of him, a tower of blue-white flame flickering in the open circle at the heart of the throne room. No one crossed the bonfire. It was sacred, guarded, spelled. But nothing stopped Caelen now. He screamed, not words, not a plea, just raw sound, and dove straight into the flame. It hit him like knives. His robes went first. The thick folds caught instantly, wrapping his body in ribbons of searing pain. His feet failed him mid-leap. He collapsed onto the coals, skin hissing, smoke curling from his arms. He didn't remember crawling through the other side. Just the smell. Just the roar of his own heartbeat. Just the moment a fresh wind hit his ruined skin and told him, "You're not dead yet. Run." And so he did. Down the citadel steps, through guards stunned to stillness, over marble, over mud, into night. He ran until the lights were gone, until the screams behind him turned to howls of alarm, until the tower was nothing more than a jagged glow on the black horizon. He ran with lungs full of fire and veins full of wild heat. His clothes were ash. His skin peeled. His legs bled. He didn't care. Pain was better than being claimed. Pain was his own. The Moonrift Wilds loomed ahead like a monster's mouth, a border of broken trees and forbidden hills where the bond laws didn't reach, where Omegas who vanished were never found again, where even Alphas didn't patrol alone. He reached the edge and collapsed. Mud swallowed his knees. Rain began to fall, sharp and sudden. It hissed as it hit his skin, cooling nothing, only adding weight. He crawled into the trees on elbows and nails. His heat was peaking. Every breath hurt. Every movement made the world twist sideways. He kept going. When his body finally gave out, it wasn't gentle. Caelen crashed beneath a skeletal pine, naked, blistered, trembling. Rain slicked his skin, plastered hair to his cheek. His fingers dug into the dirt like claws. His chest heaved. He didn't cry. He couldn't. He'd used every tear long before this. The last thing he saw or thought he saw, through the fog of pain and steam and rain, was a figure. Large, still, unmoving, watching him from the trees. Wolf, not animal, not man, something in between. Its eyes glowed, faintly gold, faintly aware. It didn't move, didn't speak. But Caelen, on the verge of unconsciousness, felt one word settle into his bones like a second breath. Alpha. Then all went dark. Chapter 2. He should have left him there. Nyric Ravell found the body just before dawn, at the forest's edge where the pines thinned and the rot thickened. It was sprawled in the mud like a sacrifice, limbs contorted, steam rising from pale, blood-crusted skin. He almost didn't stop. His wolf stirred beneath his ribs, uneasy but silent. The scent hit first, scorched silk, coppery blood, and under it all, something darker. Bonfire and broken pheromones. Omega heat, wild and unanchored, tainted. It clung to the trees like smoke, spoiled by pain, threaded with fear so sharp it made Nyric's stomach turn. His jaw clenched. His hand hovered over the blade sheathed at his hip. The law was clear. Kill what crosses the line. That was the rule. No exceptions. No names. But this one, this tangle of bruised flesh and breathless defiance, was not a wolf soldier, not a border raider, not even a rogue alpha with a taste for chaos. No, this was something else. Small, barely breathing, barely clothed. His robes, or what remained of them, hung in charred ribbons off sharp shoulders. His spine was arched unnaturally, the angles too fragile, like a creature caught mid-burn and left to cool in its own ash. And his mouth, gods, his mouth moved. "Don't!" The boy rasped, voice raw and cracked. "Don't touch me. You're not my alpha." Then silence. The kind of silence that wrapped around Nyric's throat and tugged. He should have walked away. He should have slit the boy's throat clean, let the forest take him, left him as bones in the soil like so many others. That was what he'd done before, what he had sworn to keep doing. The line was sacred, and this thing had come from the other side. But as he turned, something hit him, not physical, not scent, mental. A shockwave, not pain exactly, but raw psychic force. The world spun sideways. Images, not his own, slammed into him, bleeding across the backs of his eyes. White walls, a ring of fire, knees forced to the ground, collar too tight, a scream muffled in silk. "Help me." He staggered backward, breath caught, hand slamming into the trunk of a tree. The images vanished as quickly as they'd come, leaving a jagged echo humming through his teeth. He looked back at the Omega, unconscious again now, head turned toward him, lips parted. There was blood on his thigh, fresh, no Alpha's scent on it. Not yet, not marked, not claimed, just hunted, and in heat. "Shit!" Nyric hissed under his breath. He didn't carry Omegas. He didn't shelter them. He hadn't touched another body in 3 years. And yet, something inside him, maybe the wolf, maybe something older, pulled his feet forward. He knelt. His arms slid beneath the boy before he could stop himself, one under knees, one behind shoulder blades. The flesh was hot, too hot, fevered, scent glands swollen and red, pulse thready. The Omega flinched at contact but didn't wake. Nyric straightened, lifting him easily. The boy barely weighed anything. He was all bones and fire and broken silence. And Nyric, God's help him, carried him through the woods like he carried death itself. His cabin wasn't far. Hidden deep in the undergrowth, tucked between boulders and bramble, it was little more than an old hunting post fortified with survival-grade wards and a few rough-hewn charms. He hadn't lit the fire in days. Now he regretted that. He kicked the door open and crossed the threshold, careful not to jostle the boy. The room was dim and cool, the air thick with cedar and dust. He laid the Omega down on the cot with care he hadn't used in years. The boy whimpered. "Shoo!" Nyric muttered, not sure who he was speaking to. He grabbed a water canister, soaked a cloth, and ran it over the boy's temples. The skin burned beneath it. Fever. Bad. Possibly fatal. The scent of unclaimed heat intensified, like crushed flower petals rotting under pressure. His body was fighting itself and losing. Nyric stood back. This is a mistake. He should wait for the fever to kill him. Let nature be merciful where men had not. But the memory flash slammed him again. The flames, the chains, that unbearable scream. Not memory. A link. One-sided, primitive, but real. Commoner blood, Nyric muttered. Too young. Too soft. He moved to the sideboard, rummaged for an old vial of suppressant dampener. Expired, but it might help. When he returned to the bed, the boy was moving again. Eyes flickering under bruised lids. Lips parted. Then a whisper, so quiet Nyric almost missed it. You smell like free air." Nyric froze. The cloth dropped from his hand. "Like wind," the boy mumbled. "Not walls, not fire." He reached out, blindly, fingers trembling, not touching Nyric, but searching. Nyric caught the wrist before it could reach him. Too late. A second psychic wave surged through him, stronger this time. It wasn't images. It was feeling. Caelen's soul, battered, scorched, trembling, opened for a heartbeat. And Nyric saw everything. The burn of the bonfire, the silver restraints, the audience clapping, the Alpha towering over him. And a scream. "If you mark me, I will kill myself with your teeth still in my neck." Nyric dropped the boy's hand like it stung. His lungs weren't working right. The connection snapped, but the taste lingered. He stumbled backward, hit the wall, and stared at the creature in his bed. Omega. Not just any Omega. A marked for claim. a ceremony escapee, possibly a traitor, possibly bait, possibly both, and still unmarked, unclaimed, still whispering nonsense about free air. "You're going to kill me," Nyric murmured to no one. Then, without understanding why, not really, he began to unbuckle his outer coat, hung it on the wall, stoked the fire to life, and sat beside the cot with a blade across his knee. Watching, waiting. The boy didn't wake for hours. But when he did, sharp and sudden, as if shot through with lightning, the first thing he did was scramble backward into the corner. Still fever-glazed, still barely clothed, eyes wide and wild. And he asked, voice cracking, "Who are you?" A pause. Then lower, "Are you going to mark me?" Chapter 3, The Scent That Claws Through Bone. The storm cracked the sky open just after nightfall. Thunder rolled low across the treetops, shaking the roof of the cabin like a warning growl from some unseen god. Rain came fast behind it, sheeting down in a frenzy, drumming against the wooden shingles like fists demanding entrance. Inside, Caelen writhed. The fever hadn't broken. If anything, it had worsened, heat pooling beneath his skin in waves. His breath shallow, too fast. His fingers twitching against the thin blanket Nyric had left draped over him. His lips were parted, slick with sweat. The scent spilling off him now was different. Not just Omega in heat, but Omega untouched, deep in the throes of second-phase ignition. Nyric had seen it once before, only once, and he'd sworn never again. So he was outside, in the mud, leaning with both hands braced against the cabin wall, breathing like something was trying to crawl out of his chest. He'd locked the door behind him, barred it, reinforced the frame with old runic nails. And it still didn't feel like enough. The scent had already leaked through the cracks. Rain couldn't drown it. It clung to him, thick and dizzying, bleeding down into his lungs like a call he had no name for. Sweet, right? Painfully innocent, and yet not. Not anymore. He'd seen the way Caelen's fingers curled in the sheets, the way his thighs trembled under the fever. Heard the soft whimper in his throat when he shifted, the unconscious way he whispered, "Don't leave me," into the crook of his elbow. Nyric pressed his forehead to the wet wood. He had been through hell, through exile, through battle, through the betrayal of every vow he'd once thought sacred. He'd survived all of it. But this boy inside his cabin, curled around his own loneliness like it might keep him alive. This was a different kind of war. And Nyric was losing. Another roll of thunder cracked above him. The trees groaned. The wind screamed. Lightning seared across the dark like a whip. And inside, Caelen screamed. Not out loud. Not with his mouth. With his mind. Nyric's spine snapped straight. The psychic blast wasn't directed. It wasn't even conscious. But it was wild and pure and reaching. And it crashed into him like a tidal wave of fire and shadow. He saw flashes, chains, firelight on pale skin, a voice sobbing, "I don't want it. I don't want it. Don't make me." Then silence. Then a heartbeat that was not his own. Then, Nyric, his name whispered like a prayer. Or a curse. He didn't remember opening the door. He just moved. His boots slammed into the wooden floor. The scent hit him in full, like walking through fire, like biting into forbidden fruit, like every sin he had ever denied himself wrapped in silk and whimpering. Caelen was on the floor. The blanket had twisted around him, half kicked off. His bare legs were slick with sweat, knees drawn up, body shivering uncontrollably despite the heat. His skin glowed pale in the low firelight, flushed at the throat, at the belly lower still. His eyes fluttered open but didn't seem to see anything. Nyric barely kept from falling to his knees. The wolf inside him, the thing he had leashed and buried and fed only cold silence for years, lunged. It wanted to take, to bite, to mark, but Caelen moved first. He crawled forward, not quite aware, not quite dreaming, fingers digging into the wood as if the ground itself might vanish if he didn't hold on. He reached Nyric's boots, collapsed against them. His voice was a scrape of sound. "Please!" Nyric's hands fisted at his sides. "Caelen," he said, hoarse. No response. "Caelen, look at me." The boy lifted his head. His pupils were blown wide. His lips were parted. A fever sheen clung to every inch of him. He looked wild, fragile, beautiful in a way that made Nyric feel like his own spine might break from the pressure. "You're not mine," Nyric said, more to himself than to Caelen. But Caelen whimpered and pressed his cheek against Nyric's shin. "You're not," Nyric repeated. The wolf disagreed. Caelen was trembling violently now. His breathing hitched. His fingers slid up Nyric's leg without thought, desperate for contact, for relief, for anything. "I don't want to be alone again," he whispered. "I don't want to go back in the dark." Nyric dropped to one knee. His hands hovered, shaking. He could feel the pull, the mark not yet made, the connection not yet sealed, but called. Like destiny had bled out of the fire and carved itself into this moment. But Caelen was not asking for mating. He was asking to not be abandoned. So Nyric pulled him into his arms, held him, nothing more. Caelen climbed into his lap like a child, arms around Nyric's neck, face pressed into his shoulder. His skin burned like live coals. His scent clung to every breath. And Nyric, God's help him, just rocked him back and forth like the answer to years of silence had always been this. Warmth and stillness and restraint sharp enough to draw blood. Caelen shuddered against him. "You're an alpha," he mumbled. "But you're not like them." "No," Nyric said. "I thought they all wanted to take." "I don't." Caelen breathed. "Shallow, wet, then small. Then why do I still want you to?" Nyric closed his eyes. He could feel every beat of the boy's heart, every quiver, every instinctive shift of hips, of thighs, of scent. But he did nothing, said nothing. The storm howled outside. The fire inside guttered. Time stretched, long and fragile and aching. Then, a crunch of a footstep in the mud. Outside. Close. Nyric's eyes snapped open. His nose flared. Not animal. Not wind. Not storm. Men. Someone was out there. Someone was watching. And they had found him. Chapter 4, marked by no one yet owned by all. The first arrow didn't miss. It sliced through the roof shingles just above Caelen's head, embedding itself with a sickening thunk into the wooden beam beside the hearth. Splinters exploded across the cabin's interior, and the wolf pelt blanket fell from Nyric's shoulders as he sprang to his feet in a single, fluid motion. Caelen barely had time to react before Nyric's hand was on his chest, shoving him back toward the corner, voice low and sharp. "Stay down." The door had already blown open. A deliberate breach spell, burned at the edges. Snow poured in with the wind, and behind it came the scent Caelen would never forget. Sterile metal, sanctified silver, old spell ink soaked into leather and armor. White moon seekers, the holy dogs of the citadel, spirit-bound hunters, silent, merciless, trained from birth to sever unclean threads in the tapestry of obedience. And tonight they'd found him. Caelen's limbs went cold, even through the fever still lingering in his veins. His skin prickled with a sense he hadn't felt since the ceremony, the kind of dread that sat behind the eyes and whispered, "You are prey again." He saw one figure cross the threshold, white cloak, black boots, mask etched with the rune of Null, and the rest followed like shadows stitched to snow. Nyric didn't wait for them to speak. He lunged. No sword drawn, no warning, just movement, fast, silent, deadly. The first seeker never got a spell off. Nyric's fist collided with his jaw, the mask cracking under the impact. The man went down, bone crunching, Then chaos. The cabin exploded into motion, runes flaring, blades hissing, spells cast in tight murmurs. Caelen ducked, rolling behind the cot, hands pressed to his mouth to keep from crying out. He saw Nyric move like smoke between attackers, all strength and wild control, but he was outnumbered. And worse, the Seekers weren't aiming to kill him. They wanted Caelen alive. "Retrieve the asset," one of them barked over the wind. "Do not let the Alpha contaminate." "Asset," Nyric snarled, grabbing the man by the throat and slamming him into the table. Wood cracked. Blood sprayed. "He's not your fucking property." A flare of psychic backlash lit the cabin's center like a miniature star. Caelen flinched. Something inside him, something old, something buried, shivered awake. He looked at Nyric again. Not at his fists. Not at the wounds opening on his ribs. Not at the snarl curling his lips. But at the pain behind his eyes. This wasn't an Alpha trained for command. He wasn't using formation moves. His strikes were brutal, yes, but too unstructured, too full of rage to be military. And then, with a shout, Nyric twisted mid-lunge, and his body changed. Not fully. Not the way it should have. One arm twisted wrong. Claws erupted from knuckles in jagged, incomplete spurts. The muscles in his back bulged and spasmed. His shoulder blades cracked outward, veins glowing under skin, and his mouth split too wide, teeth serrated, not quite human, not quite wolf. The air turned thick with static. The Seekers paused, recognizing what they saw. Wolf god scarred. Failed vessel. Caelen gasped. He had never seen anything like it. Had only read, in brief, redacted records during his training, that those who survived contact with the wolf gods sometimes came back marked, cursed with fragments of divine possession. Supposedly unstable. Supposedly already dead. But Nyric was very much alive. Bleeding. Snarling. Fighting like he had nothing left to lose. And when he turned toward the last two Seekers and roared, the sound didn't come from just his throat. It came from deep inside the forest, from the bones of the earth. It made the snow freeze mid-air. One of the men dropped his blade and ran. The other stood too long, and Nyric drove him through the cabin wall. Silence followed. Broken beams. Shattered table. Nyric stood in the ruins of his home, breath ragged, half-wolf still, trembling, leaking blood, hands clawed and smoking. Caelen rose slowly. Every instinct told him to stay back, to retreat. This was no longer a man. This was something else. But his feet moved forward anyway, step by step, until he stood just outside the splash of Nyric's shadow. "Caelen!" Nyric rasped, but stopped. His voice was ruined. "You're not like them," Caelen said. Nyric laughed. Once, low and bitter. "You sure? You saw the same thing I did. I saw you fight for me. I saw myself lose control. You could have let them take me." Nyric looked away. Blood dripped from his jaw. "I was trained to let them take everything," he muttered. "That's what we're made for. Soldiers. Containers. Killers. Nothing else. You're not nothing. I'm a vessel that cracked too early." Caelen stepped closer. Nyric didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't retreat. "I've been marked by no one," Caelen whispered. "But I've been owned by everyone." Nyric looked at him then. Really looked. The fire in his eyes dulled. Flickered. Went still. "I know what that feels like," he said. Caelen lifted his hand, slow, careful, and pressed it, not to Nyric's chest, not to his throat, but to his shoulder. Just a palm. Just skin on skin. Nothing more. "I believe you do," he said. Nyric's knees buckled. He dropped to the floor, not out of exhaustion, but because the mark at his spine, the divine remnant of the wolf god's bite, had begun to burn. And Caelen, without meaning to, without knowing how, responded. His body moved with instinct born not from training but from survival. His fingers pressed against Nyric's temple. The world shifted, not physically, spiritually. A pulse passed between them, sharp and hot and terrifying, like a door cracking open, like two halves of a story finally admitting they belonged to the same book. And when Caelen fell to his knees beside him, gasping, eyes wide, Nyric caught him before he hit the ground. "You!" he whispered, eyes wild. But Caelen was already unconscious. In his sleep, he murmured one thing. A name. Nyric's. Chapter 5, The Dream Where Wolves Burn Gold. The first thing Caelen saw was fire. Not the burning heat of the Bond altar. Not the suffocating walls of White Citadel's ceremonial flames. No, this fire was older, wilder. It licked the air with a kind of sacred hunger, gold-white and impossible, as if moonlight had been lit with teeth. He stood, no, floated, at the edge of a great basin, the sky above a mirror of smoke and stars. Stone pillars loomed in concentric rings around him, each carved with symbols that pulsed faintly as if breathing. Between them, the shadows moved, no, lived, and within them, he felt a presence. Large, not entirely separate from him, but not wholly familiar either. A soft growl rolled across the space. He turned, and there, half submerged in fog, prowling along the curved edge of the dream temple, was a wolf. Not a beast, not a hallucination, something more primal. The creature's coat shimmered, neither fur nor flame but something in between, molten gold that rippled with every step. Its eyes burned with recognition. Caelen's pulse stuttered. Then, like mist given form, another wolf stepped into view. This one was all ash and shadow, silver-gray streaked with black and crimson, scarred across one flank. Where the first burned, this one bled. And yet, Caelen knew them both. The golden wolf opened its mouth, slow, deliberate, and bared its fangs. The silver one lowered its head. The silence between them broke. They lunged. Teeth clashed. Bodies collided. Gold scorched gray. Gray coiled through gold. A dance of fire and smoke and ancient need. They did not fight as enemies but as creatures born of the same broken hunger. The same unspeakable ache to belong, to bind, to burn together. Caelen could feel every impact in his real body, down to the way his limbs tensed, the breath he couldn't draw, the pressure behind his ribs like something blooming too fast. His skin was wet with sweat. His hips shifted against a weight beside him. He didn't know when his hand had found another, larger one, but their fingers were woven now, tightly. Back in the dream, the wolves fell in tandem, their bodies colliding, not in violence now, but in surrender. One on top of the other. Fangs found throats not to kill but to claim. The gold wolf bit gently. The gray wolf didn't flinch. There was no blood, only heat, only the moment their chests touched, and the flames did not consume, but merged. Caelen cried out. In both worlds, his back arched. A surge of something, not orgasm, not pain, but something infinitely older, shot down his spine like a lightning strike. He gasped awake. Reality reassembled around him in fragments. Wooden rafters, cold air, a storm's aftermath. Nyric beside him, too close. They hadn't meant to sleep that way, but the floor was broken and the cot too narrow. And at some point, maybe when Caelen had begun to convulse from the backlash, they had ended up entwined. Nyric's chest was flush to his back. One strong arm curled around his waist. Their legs were tangled. Their heartbeats matched. Caelen's skin buzzed. He tried to move. Nyric's arm tightened, not aggressively, just instinctively, like a reflex. "You saw it too," Caelen whispered. Nyric didn't answer immediately. His breath was warm against the back of Caelen's neck. Then, "The wolves." Caelen nodded once. "I was one," he said. "So was I." He hesitated. We weren't fighting. No, we were choosing, Nyric murmured. Caelen's throat ached. In the dream, he had remembered things, not just images but truths. His own childhood. The first time the syringe went in. The cold light of the labs. The way they'd forced his body into patterns it hadn't yet learned to fear. They had never waited for his first heat. They had induced it, artificially, because he was valuable, because he was predictable, because a marked Omega was easier to sell than a wild one. Tears wet his cheek before he could stop them. I wasn't born broken, Caelen said, voice shaking. They carved it into me. Nyric shifted, and for a moment, Caelen thought he'd move away. He didn't. Instead, he pressed his forehead gently to the nape of Caelen's neck and whispered, I'll remember who you are, even if they don't want you to. Silence followed. Not empty, but full. Like the breath before a storm. Like the second before teeth sink in. And then Caelen felt it. A sting. Not pain. Not deep. Not even intentional. But when he pulled away slightly and reached back to touch his skin, his fingers met something hot, etched just beneath the surface of his flesh. He twisted, sat up, pulled the blanket aside. There, just above the curve of his spine, was a mark. Not an alpha's bite, not a brand, but something older. A burn in the shape of a crescent, wreathed in a ring of gray. His eyes widened. Nyric sat up too, staring, mouth slightly open. You've never been marked, he said. Caelen looked down at him, eyes searching. I still haven't, he said. Nyric met his gaze. But your soul did. Chapter 6, What Should Never Be Touched. The mark wouldn't stop growing. By the time the second morning light cracked through the broken shutters, the faint crescent scar on Caelen's spine had deepened into something more complex. Pale arcs laced with silver lines, stretching upward in sharp threads like the roots of an unseen tree, pulsing faintly beneath the skin. It didn't hurt. It throbbed, like a second heartbeat that didn't quite belong to him. Nyric noticed it first. When Caelen twisted in the half-light to sit up, the blanket slipping down his back, Nyric's hand caught his shoulder without thought, steadying him, and froze. It's spreading, he said quietly. Caelen nodded, not looking at him. I know. The rest of the day blurred. Nyric ground a bitter-smelling paste from dried wolf sage and river root. Fingers stained green, silence heavy. Caelen sat on the floor beside the fire, sweat beading his brow, trying not to wince as the pulses behind his ribs echoed again and again with a rhythm not his own. They didn't speak much. Didn't need to. By dusk, Nyric said, Come with me. He didn't wait for a reply. Caelen followed. They walked through the snow in silence, deeper into the woods than Caelen had ever dared. The trees grew denser here, older. Their roots knotted around secrets and bones alike. Then, down a narrow cleft between black stones, the path dropped, steep, half-hidden. Caelen slipped once. Nyric caught his wrist. Their hands stayed joined longer than necessary. The cave opened like a yawn beneath the cliff. And inside, bathed in low blue light from mineral veins in the rock, was water. Still, steaming, holy. The scent was clean and sharp, like pine and crushed stone. Caelen breathed it in and felt something loosen in his chest. Nyric stepped ahead of him and shrugged out of his shirt, the motion effortless. You'll need to soak, he said. Caelen hesitated, but the heat was already drawing him in. He peeled the borrowed shirt from his skin, slowly, mindful of the rawness under his arms, the ache along his ribs. When he turned, he caught Nyric watching him, not hungrily, not even possessively, but intensely, like he was memorizing pain he hadn't caused. They stepped into the water together. It enveloped him like breath, like memory, like something that had been waiting to hold him for years. The ache in his spine dimmed. The heat seeped into every corner. Nyric sat against the curved stone wall, arms draped loosely over the ledge. His eyes were half-lidded, jaw tight. Caelen drifted toward him before he could second-guess the instinct. When their legs brushed under the surface, Nyric didn't move away. "Thank you," Caelen said softly. Nyric tilted his head, not quite smiling. "For what?" "For not making this feel like a cage." Nyric's mouth twitched, something bitter in the curve. "I know what a cage feels like." Caelen turned slightly in the water, so they faced each other more directly. The mark on his back pulsed. "May I ask you something?" Nyric gave the barest nod. Caelen's voice was quiet. "If I asked you to mark me, right now, would you say yes?" The silence between them snapped taut. The air grew heavier. The steam felt less like comfort and more like pressure. Caelen watched the slow change in Nyric's body, the way his hands tensed against the stone, the way his nostrils flared. His eyes burned, not with desire alone, but with restraint so sharp it looked like pain. Then Nyric spoke, low and clear. "If you want to destroy the last thing that still belongs to you," he said, "then go ahead. Ask." Caelen flinched. Nyric's gaze didn't soften. "Is that what you think this is?" he continued. "A solution? A bomb? You think a bite will quiet the thing in you that's been screaming since they took your name away?" Caelen's throat tightened. "I thought maybe—" Nyric cut him off. "Maybe what? That it would make you feel whole? That it would finally give you an alpha who didn't hurt you when he claimed you?" The words hit like slaps. Caelen's breath hitched. His eyes burned. "I thought maybe," he whispered, "it would mean you wanted me." Nyric's expression broke. Only for a second. Then he looked away. "I do," he said, so low Caelen almost missed it. "But I am not going to take something from you just because it's been taken before." Tears slid down Caelen's cheeks before he could stop them. He turned away, pressing his hands over his face. The mark on his back pulsed again, and this time it felt like punishment. "I'm sorry," he choked out. Nyric reached out, touched his arm, gently. "Don't be." But Caelen didn't answer. He only wept, shoulders shaking, lips pressed together so tightly it hurt. They stayed in the water until it cooled. When they returned to the cabin, Caelen said nothing. He laid on the cot and stared at the ceiling, hands folded across his chest, as if willing the fire in his skin to go out. Nyric stayed on the floor, back to the wall, watching the door. When Caelen's breathing slowed into what might have been sleep, Nyric let his eyes close too. He didn't hear the quiet creak of the window, didn't hear the soft crunch of snow, didn't see Caelen slip into the dark with nothing but his cloak and the pain he'd tried not to name, and didn't feel the sudden emptiness when the link between them dimmed, just slightly. Chapter 7, where the mark ends, pain begins. The snow at the base of the old St. Mark monolith was stained red when Caelen fell to his knees. The frost didn't bite as hard as it should have. Not through the fever crawling up his spine again. Not through the heat blooming from the mark on his back like a sun made of teeth. The runes carved into the shattered monument pulsed with long-dead magic, humming softly beneath his fingers as he pressed both palms to the stone. He came here for silence, for severance, for an end. But what he found was only agony. The monument didn't respond the way he'd hoped. It didn't cleanse the bond or undo what had been burned into his spirit during the dream. Instead, it screamed back, a spiritual backlash ripping through his consciousness like shrapnel. He doubled over, breath caught. Then came the psychic feedback. His head snapped up, eyes glowing, pupils wide. A single, raw sob tore loose from his throat before his voice broke into a scream, long, wordless, furious. The trees shook. Somewhere far off, birds scattered in clouds of black wings. And within minutes, they were coming. 3 figures glided through the tree line like phantoms. Long white cloaks, gloved hands, silver-edged blades strapped across their chests. The White Moon Hunters. dispatched when any unlicensed psychic flare registered near sacred ground. They didn't ask questions. They drew blades. Caelen tried to run. He didn't make it far. Pain speared through his skull again, the backlash from the monolith still raw and burning. He stumbled in the snow, coughing blood into his hand, half dragging himself away. He didn't see the first hunter raise a hand, forming a rune of binding midair. Didn't see the second one circle behind him, aiming for the base of his spine. But he felt it when the third lunged, and stopped moving, stopped breathing, stopped being alive. A blur of gray slammed into the hunter from the side, bones cracking with sickening ease. Blood sprayed across the monument stone as Nyric tackled the man mid-cast and tore out his throat with a sound not wholly human. He didn't speak, didn't pause, didn't warn. The other two hunters turned, weapons ready, but Nyric was already moving again, a blur of ash and rage. He moved like someone who had nothing left to save, who was only saving. One blade caught his shoulder, silver meeting flesh, slicing deep. He didn't stop. The next man went down gurgling, ribs shattered. The last tried to flee, casting a blind spell behind him, only to be caught mid-stride by claws that tore through his spine. Then silence, breath, snowflakes, still falling, and blood. Nyric stood in the wreckage of the scene, chest heaving, shoulders hunched, his side pouring red into the snow. The gash across his torso pulsed bright and wide. His jaw was clenched so tightly his teeth had cracked. Caelen stared at him, not with gratitude, not with relief, but with a look that gutted deeper than any blade. "You came," he said, voice trembling. Nyric didn't move. "You knew I left," Caelen continued, stepping forward, eyes wide, wild. "You knew, and you still didn't stop me." Nyric's mouth opened, closed. "I almost died." "I know," Nyric rasped. "You let me." "No. You're my alpha." Caelen's voice cracked, bitter and bleeding. "You're my only alpha. And you still chose to watch me fall instead of catch me." Nyric stepped back, one hand pressed hard against his ribs. "You asked me not to mark you. I asked you not to own me," Caelen shouted. "Not to leave me." The wind howled through the trees. Neither moved. The bond between them pulsed, tight, strained, full of unsaid things, of nights curled together in silence, of hands that didn't touch where it mattered, of mouths that spoke restraint but never longing. And then Caelen's voice dropped, soft as ash. "Is it because I'm not worth it?" Nyric flinched. Blood slipped between his fingers. He didn't answer. He couldn't. Instead, he turned, staggered once, then walked into the trees, back stiff, boots dragging through blood-streaked snow. "Coward?" Caelen whispered, tears carving hot lines down his cheeks. He fell to his knees, screamed. But no one answered this time. Not Nyric. Not the spirits in the stone. Only silence. The path back blurred behind his grief. He didn't see the shadow waiting. Didn't hear the shift of feet on frozen ground. Just the brief, almost tender press of cloth to his mouth, and the world going black. When he opened his eyes again, it was to candlelight, to silk, to chains, and the distant toll of the citadel bell. He was in White Moon again. He was in the Tower of Binding. And he was not alone. Chapter 8: The Tower That Breeds Loyalty. Caelen came back to awareness not through pain, but through the sound of a voice. Low, calm, precise, serious. His words bled through the soft pulse of sterile light, reverberating across the curved metal walls like a sermon echoing through a hollow skull. "You are safe. You are home. You are not meant to run." Caelen tried to lift his head. He couldn't. A soft restraint held his neck in place, nestled against the base of his skull like a lover's palm. It didn't hurt. That made it worse. His wrists were similarly bound, not with chains, but with coils of bioreactive silk, humming faintly with rune currents. The soft, humming mechanical rhythm of the compliance cradle under him thrummed into his spine. Everything was gentle, obscenely gentle. You were born for this. That is why you were chosen. A second voice, thinner, more clinical, joined the first. Cognitive readout shows resistance at 31.4% and falling. Commander. The scent of disinfectant filled the room. And under it, the sharp tang of polished leather. Boots. He was not alone. A shadow passed across his line of sight. Serious Veil. He wasn't in armor. He wore the white-collared robes of Citadel Command. Silk trimmed in silver, the mark of state-bonded Alpha, stamped on his left shoulder like a badge of honor. His face was still perfect. Too perfect. A sculpture of loyalty given flesh. He crouched beside the cradle. Still fighting? He said softly, brushing a gloved finger along Caelen's temple. You never did understand what freedom really meant. Caelen flinched or tried to. The restraints pulsed. A new wave of warmth flooded through his spine. Not pleasure, but simulated ease. Emotional stillness manufactured by neural interface. A forced calmness, as if his brain was being gently reminded how good it felt to submit. His lips parted involuntarily. Sirius smiled. See? He said. That's better. You are not alone. You are never alone. You are guided. The voice above him played on repeat, mixed with subharmonic frequencies, low enough to vibrate in the gut, high enough to evade conscious interpretation. It was the voice of doctrine, layered under Sirius's own speech, like lullabies for obedience. Behind him, someone, probably the beta medic, adjusted something on a console. Stability levels rising, the voice reported. Alpha presence is increasing retention. Suggest commencing imprintation phase. Sirius nodded. Leave us. The medic hesitated. Commander, regulations require. Sirius didn't look at him. Leave us. The door hissed. They were alone. Sirius leaned closer, his hand settling gently on Caelen's chest. I wanted it to be me, he murmured almost tenderly. When they brought you in, do you know what I saw? Potential. Legacy. Not just in your bloodline, but in your bones. In your capacity to endure. Caelen's mouth trembled. He wanted to scream. He wanted to call Nyric's name. But the link was too faint now, dulled by inhibitors. He couldn't reach for him. Couldn't even reach for himself. I was supposed to mark you that day, Sirius continued. The bonfire was meant to seal us. You were meant to kneel and I was meant to claim. But instead you burned. His fingers moved lower, brushing over Caelen's sternum. You scarred the ceremony, Caelen. But don't worry. I'm going to heal you. He leaned down, breath hot against Caelen's neck. And then he bit. Not deep, not quite a mating bite. But the intent was there, a mockery of bond, a symbolic claim. The contact was enough to activate the sealing protocol embedded in Caelen's glands. It should have worked, but it didn't, because the second Sirius's teeth grazed the skin above the crescent-shaped mark. Everything shattered. The burn ignited like oil. A crackle of heat exploded outward. The cradle shrieked. Sparks flew. Light overloaded. Screams, one of them Caelen's, tore through the room as the psychic backlash lashed out like a whip. Sirius reeled backward, clutching his mouth, blood on his tongue. The restraints snapped. The light panels ruptured. And in the center of it all, Caelen rose, shaking, skin glowing, breath catching. He didn't think. He just spoke. A single word. A name. Nyric. The silence that followed wasn't real. It was the eye of a spiritual storm. Caelen collapsed before he hit the floor. He came to on the floor of a new cell. A sterile pod room. Padded walls. No corners. No windows. Sirius stood beyond the glass. Unbruised now. Clean again. The medic was beside him, adjusting a new interface. That reaction confirms full spiritual contamination, Sirius said. The Ravell Alpha's mark has reached stage 2. The scar is forming internally. The medic nodded. We'll proceed with the override protocol. All prior bonds will be suppressed. Emotional centers scrubbed. We estimate full compliance after 13 sessions. Sirius looked into the glass. His voice, when it came, was soft. You shouldn't have let him into your head, Caelen. Then, with a flick of his wrist, begin reconditioning. Chapter 9, The Wolf Who Dared to Die. The pain had long since settled into his bones. Nyric didn't remember collapsing. He remembered snow, red against the white, like a wound the world refused to cauterize. He remembered the gash from shoulder to ribs, where one of the white moon hunter's blades had torn through flesh and missed his heart by half a breath. He remembered not stopping. The only reason he was still upright now was hate. Not for Caelen. Never for him. For everything else. For the institution that had swallowed him. For the gods that bit him and left him marked but unclaimed. For the way Caelen said, "You're my only alpha," and meant it even when Nyric had walked away bleeding. So now he walked again. Toward death. And toward the obedience tower. He crossed the moon rift border in the hours before dawn, slipping past the decaying perimeter wards like a ghost dragged through the cracks of a forgotten prayer. The first soldier he encountered, barely more than a recruit, screamed when he saw him. Nyric didn't kill him, just disarmed him, snapped his wrist. Let the message travel faster that way. By the time he reached the outer line of White Moon's eastern garrison, he was limping. His coat was torn. Blood caked the side of his neck. But his eyes were clear, and the steel at his hip was unsheathed. It was Cray who stepped out to meet him, the same beta who had once pulled him from a burning trench, who had laughed beside him in officer drills, who had drunk himself sick the night Nyric was named vessel to the wolf god and sentenced to silence. Now Cray looked at him like a rabid animal. "You shouldn't be here," he said. Nyric smiled, all teeth. "I'm not here to ask permission." Behind Cray, the border camp stirred. A few soldiers peered out from behind crates. No one moved to stop him. Some still remembered what he'd done, what he'd become. Cray stepped forward, hands lifted. "You're bleeding out. I'll bleed later. You've got maybe an hour of fight left in you. Then I'll use it wisely." Cray's expression shifted. "What do you want, Nyric?" "Maps. Structure. Access points." Cray went still. "Of the tower?" "Yes." Silence. "That's suicide." Nyric shrugged. "That's prophecy." A second figure approached, taller, slower, older. Lauren, the only man who had ever stood beside Nyric without flinching. His once co-captain, his sparring rival, his friend, now demoted, left behind. "Don't do this," Lauren said, voice rough. Nyric's body swayed on his feet, but his eyes stayed sharp. "He's in there, isn't he?" Lauren didn't answer, didn't need to. Nyric turned to Cray. "I'm not here for a fight. Could have fooled me. I'm here to end something." Cray exhaled, looked at Lauren. Lauren said nothing. Then Cray reached behind the perimeter shack and pulled free a scroll case, old and worn. 3 levels, he said, tossing it toward Nyric. First 2 are compliance and biodampeners. Third is imprintation. Deepest. That's where they'd keep someone like him. Nyric caught it with one hand. "There's a security corridor under the old Echo Trench," Cray added, reluctantly. "You'll need the override rune." Nyric raised his blade. Cray blinked. "You're not gonna cut through." "I want blood." "Not his own." He dragged the edge of the blade across his forearm, slicing deep. Blood welled, black-red. He knelt, dipped his fingers into it, and marked the edge of the scroll case with a simple glyph. "Caelen." Lauren stepped forward, quiet. You know you won't make it out. I'm not going to, Nyric said simply. Cray paled. Then why? Nyric looked up. Not at them. At the wall of light rising behind the outer towers. At the place where the air shimmered with false purity. I'm not his alpha, he said. His voice didn't shake. But he's my faith. Lauren opened his mouth, closed it again. Nyric stood, tucking the scroll case into his coat, tightening the belt at his waist, then reached into his inner pocket, pulled out a vial. Cray swore the moment he saw the symbol on the glass. A wolf's jaw, black marked. You're not, he breathed. You're not serious. Nyric uncorked the vial. The scent hit the air like rot and silver. Wolf god venom, engineered to purge a vessel's soul after possession, used once, in ancient times, to seal what could not be killed. I've got 12 hours, Nyric said, before your organs rupture. Nyric's smile was soft. More than I need. He drank. The effect was instant. His pupils dilated. The mark across his back flared, scorching through shirt and skin, leaking light into the dawn. His body shook, but didn't fall. And when he looked up again, the soldier was gone. Only the wolf remained. Chapter 10. Shatter the bond, or die together. The alarms didn't sound until it was far too late. By then, Nyric had already gutted the first 2 guards at the perimeter checkpoint, carved through the biometric lock at the tower's base, and stepped inside wearing a trail of his own blood like a crown. The venom was killing him. Slowly, precisely, like it had been designed to. His veins burned. His lungs clawed at air as if it might abandon him at any moment. But the wolf in him was louder than the pain. It moved him forward, one brutal step at a time, toward the spiral core of the obedience tower. Where they had him, where he was. He didn't need maps anymore. The mark on his back pulsed like a lodestone, responding to the buried resonance of Caelen's bond scar, drawing him like a tethered blade drawn to a hand it had never forgotten. He passed the first checkpoint in silence, the second in ash. By the time he reached the core, the scent of fire and blood had reached the upper chambers. He heard boots scrambling, a siren start, the crackle of distant psychic distortion where containment fields began to fail. Good. Let it fall. Let them all hear what it sounded like when one Omega's name could break a kingdom. Inside the compliance sanctum, the transfer ritual was already beginning. Caelen was restrained at the center of a massive spiral rune. Half naked, skin slick with ritual oil, eyes vacant. His back arched weakly against the shackles, soft silver coils digging into skin rubbed raw. For technicians moved around him with solemn efficiency, adjusting spirit amplifiers and sealing conduits. And above them all, Sarius, clothed in ceremonial black, a needle blade at his hip, a ghost of satisfaction stretched across his mouth like something holy. He hadn't seen Nyric yet, not until the door blew in, not until Nyric stalked through the smoke, eyes lit with fire, no armor, no hesitation, only a half-broken body moving with the will of something far crueler than survival. Sarius's hand went to his weapon. Too slow. Nyric crossed the sanctum in seconds. The scream of steel meeting bone tore through the room. Sarius staggered. His shoulder pierced through and pinned against the obsidian arch of the central altar. Blood poured freely, dark and fast, painting the sigils beneath his feet. The technicians screamed. One fled. 2 tried to fight. Neither succeeded. Nyric didn't look at them again. Didn't even glance toward the hole in the wall now pulsing with warning lights. His eyes were only for Caelen, still slumped in the center of the circle, body slick with sweat, face too pale. He didn't speak. Not at first. Then, a twitch, a flicker, a single shaking breath, and Caelen turned his head. His lips moved, broken, small. You! Nyric stepped into the circle, heedless of the remaining runes. His boot crushed a line of chalk. The spell sparked and died. Caelen blinked through the haze. "You came." His voice cracked. "I almost forgot who I was." Nyric reached out, blood-streaked, shaking, and touched his face. "Then let me remember for you." The contact snapped the seal. The mark on Caelen's back flared. Nyric's palm burned where it touched his skin. A second heartbeat bloomed. Theirs, bonded not by ritual, not by hierarchy, but by choice, by refusal. A spiritual explosion detonated through the chamber, throwing debris into the walls. The rune lines ruptured. The shackles fell from Caelen's wrists like water. And in that singular moment, Nyric caught him as he collapsed, wrapping both arms around his fevered body. Their foreheads touched. "I'm here," Nyric whispered. "No more forgetting." Caelen's hands clawed at his shirt, trembling. He tilted his head, pressed his lips, desperate, bruised, against Nyric's mouth. It wasn't gentle. It was a claim. He bit down, not hard, but deep enough to draw blood. His breath hitched as their bond rippled, visible, golden, electric. A halo formed around their joined minds, visible only to those gifted with spirit sight. And Caelen, lips still pressed to Nyric's, whispered, "If this is the price, then let it burn me." The world cracked. Their bond, half-formed, God-marked, and broken, flared like a star. The top of the tower exploded. Windows shattered. Alarms wailed. The spiritual conduit ruptured, raining divine fire onto the city below. And inside the core, the world paused. Caelen lay in Nyric's arms, their bodies slack, breathing shallow. The venom in Nyric's veins pulsed faster now, ticking its final countdown. But Sarius was not dead. Not yet. He pulled himself free from the altar spike, blood gushing from his shoulder, one arm limp. He laughed, a horrible sound. "You think this is victory?" he rasped. "You think love can stop purification?" He staggered toward the edge of the chamber, where a calm crystal blinked red. "Let them all come. Let them see you burn. The purge has already begun. Across every sector." He smiled, teeth red. "Goodbye, Caelen." Then he vanished through the smoke. And somewhere far above, on the council dais, a dozen masked figures lifted their hands. A single phrase echoed across the kingdom. "Activate Contingency 0. Burn the echo line. Kill all resonance." Chapter 11, The Cost of Being Chosen. They didn't stop running for 3 days. When they finally did, it was because Caelen collapsed. Not from injury, not from pursuit, from the mark. The crescent-shaped scar on his back had begun to pulse again, no longer with warmth but with fire, irregular, ragged, like a second heart infected with someone else's pain. The more distance they put between themselves and White Moon, the worse it became. Nyric had carried him half the final climb, all the way up the craggy slope into the jagged mouth of the hidden vale. The place was a myth, a gorge carved by blood centuries ago, abandoned by gods and men alike, a shelter for the unmarked, the unwanted. Roots split stone here. No birds sang. Only the wind whispered through broken spires of slate and bone. Nyric set Caelen down under the overhang of a hollowed cliffside and knelt beside him, blood-slick hands trembling. "You're burning up again." Caelen didn't answer. He could barely breathe. Every pulse from the scar sent a flicker through his mind. Memories not his, voices not his. Screams, metal doors slamming, the sterile cold of the tower still echoing in his ribs. Nyric touched his forehead. The contact snapped something loose. Caelen jerked back, eyes wide, pupils blown. He choked. "I'm making it worse, aren't I?" Nyric stilled. "What?" "You could hide if it weren't for me," Caelen whispered. "You could run. The venom's killing you and you're still bleeding, and I... Stop. I'm not worth this." Stop! Nyric growled again, sharper this time. You are not allowed to speak like that. Not to me. I don't want to be a weight around your neck. You're not. Caelen laughed, cracked and bitter. I'm the brand. I'm the wolf scar. I'm the experiment that broke the ritual and got half the tower killed. I'm the one they're hunting now like some wild beast let loose. You're the one who was chosen. For what? Nyric didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence between them had already said it. For him. Before either of them could speak again, a cry cut through the canyon. Small. Thin. Not animal. Human. Nyric's head snapped up. He was on his feet in seconds, blade half drawn. The sound came again. A whimper, choked off, behind the twisted roots clinging to a nearby crevice. Stay here, he said. Caelen didn't move. Couldn't. Nyric pushed through the brush and returned minutes later, cradling something in his arms. Someone. A child? No, slight frame, yes, but older. Late teens. Omega. Hair matted with dirt and blood. Robes half-burned. Skin marked with the telltale scars of collar removal. 2 fingers missing on the left hand. And eyes like glass. He stared at Caelen as Nyric laid him down near the fire. And whispered hoarse, I know you. Caelen blinked. You're the one, the stranger said. The escapee. The ceremonial Omega. You were auctioned for a king's price. Your image, it was everywhere. The perfect one. He reached out. You were supposed to save us. Nyric stepped between them instinctively, but Caelen shook his head. What's your name? He asked. Syl. You were from White Moon? Syl nodded. I was part of the rebalance batch. Marked failures. They trained us to be submissive, then culled us when the bonds didn't take. We were expendable. After you escaped, they accelerated the shutdown. Dumped us in the southern ravines. Caelen felt the breath leave his lungs. Not from pain. From guilt. Why are you still alive? Nyric asked. Syl didn't look at him. His eyes stayed on Caelen. Because I knew your name. Before anyone could speak again, the world shattered. A bolt of psi energy ripped through the air, detonating the cliff wall a meter from their shelter. Stone and dust exploded outward. Caelen shielded Syl instinctively as Nyric lunged into the open, sword already drawn. White Moon Bounty Squad. At least 6. 2 betas in reinforced hunting armor, 3 Gamma-class enforcers, and 1 lead tracker with a scent rig latched to her throat. Target confirmed. The lead snapped. Scar marked Alpha and the resonant Omega. Nyric didn't hesitate. He moved like a beast unshackled, blade cutting through the first attacker before the others had fully drawn weapons. But there were too many. Too fast. 1 blow slammed into his side. Then another. Caelen pushed Syl behind a rock and crawled toward the line. Body aching, vision doubled. He didn't think. He felt. The bond inside him, broken, raw, opened. A flare of resonance ripped from his chest, slamming into the minds of the enforcers like lightning. 2 screamed. 1 dropped her weapon. The air shook, but the cost was immediate. Blood poured from Caelen's nose. His back arched. The scar burned white hot. Nyric turned at the sound and roared. Don't use it. Caelen collapsed. I'm not letting them take you. You think I want to be saved like that? Nyric shouted, slicing another attacker in half. You think I want you to burn for me? Caelen laughed through the blood. You still think you're worth it? Nyric froze mid-blow, just long enough to be struck. A blade buried itself in his side. He gasped, then turned and snapped the attacker's neck with 1 hand. The rest fled. Only smoke and silence remained. Nyric dropped to 1 knee, breathing hard, bleeding harder. Caelen dragged himself toward him. Their hands met, and Nyric looked at him, not angry now, just tired. You idiot, he whispered. You're welcome. Syl crawled toward them, trembling. I need to tell you something. They both looked up. Syl's voice dropped low. There's a rumor spreading through the outer camps. They're building a cleansing core. What? Nyric said. A new force, hand-picked from broken bonds and sleeper units, commanded by mind-bound alphas. For what? Caelen asked, even though he knew. Syl looked at him. You. Syl's voice cracked. You're their first target. Caelen closed his eyes and whispered, Then I guess I don't get to run anymore. Chapter 12. Love is a collar they can't see. The buried den wasn't marked on any map. It was older than maps, older than kingdoms, older than the rituals they'd twisted from its bones. The mouth of the ancient wolf god shrine had collapsed long ago, buried under moss and shale, but the core chamber, hewn into the mountain's stomach, remained intact. Breathing, watching, waiting. The walls pulsed faintly with sigils too old to read and too alive to fade. Deep beneath the stone, something still lingered. It had once been a place of union. Now it was a place of hiding. Caelen sat on the worn stone ledge beside the crumbled altar, knees drawn to his chest, sweat slicking his skin despite the cold. The weight of the mark on his back, half burnt, half fused, was heavier than ever, as if a second spine had been forged out of light and grief and embedded into his skin. Nyric stood a few feet away, silent. Always too far, always too careful. Syl slept curled in the corner, arms wrapped around his own ribs like a child trying to hold in a heartbeat. I keep thinking, Caelen said finally, voice low. If I hadn't looked back at the ceremony, if I just closed my eyes, maybe it all would have gone differently. Nyric didn't answer. Maybe I wouldn't have burned, Caelen continued. Maybe I would have been just like the others. Claimed, useful, forgotten. Nyric turned toward him. His face was shadowed in the den's blue firelight, the jagged scar down his neck still raw. Is that what you want? Caelen met his gaze. No, he whispered. But it's easier than being the one who broke the bonfire and lived. Nyric took a step forward. Then another. He knelt. Not in worship. In defeat. I've held back, he said quietly. Held myself like a loaded blade around you. And it wasn't just because of your mark. Caelen waited. I killed someone once, Nyric said. An Omega. Before you. The words landed heavy. Not with teeth. Not with hands. With bond. He exhaled through his nose, jaw clenched. They matched us. Forced it like always. But the mark in me, the god's mark, it was wrong. Not asleep. Not sealed. Tore through him mid-ceiling. I felt his soul crack. He looked up. His eyes were burning. He died believing I meant it. Syl stirred behind them, still half dreaming. Caelen reached forward. His fingers brushed Nyric's jaw. You didn't kill him, Caelen said. The world did. The same one that told him he was only safe when owned. He leaned in. I'm not them. And I don't belong to them. Nyric's hand caught his wrist. You don't belong to me either. No, Caelen said. But I can choose. And he did. Their lips met with none of the careful restraint from before. There was no hesitation, no fear. Only the raw truth of two people who had both lived too long with silence as their only shield. The kiss wasn't sweet. It wasn't clean. It was wild, needy, painful at the edges. Caelen bit him first. Nyric bit back harder. Fingers gripped the back of necks and dug into ribs. Teeth scraped over fevered skin. The mark between them ignited. Twin crescents flared. Caelen's across his shoulder blade. Nyric's along his collarbone. Lines of light threaded between them. Not sharp but molten, soft and terrible and sacred. The cave trembled. Their bodies pressed together. Breaths fell out of sync, then locked again. It wasn't sex. It was surrender. Spirit and scar. Alpha and Omega. Two wolves choosing to bear a name that had been taken from them both. When they finally pulled apart, their foreheads stayed touching. "I keep thinking," Caelen whispered, barely audible. "What if this ends like before?" Nyric's voice shook. "Then let it." "But let it," he repeated. "Because if it ends, I want it to be this. Not fear. Not silence." Caelen nodded, breath catching. Then quietly, "Can you do something for me?" Nyric looked at him. Caelen didn't smile. "Not quite. Can you not make me carry this alone?" A pause. Then, "I won't," Nyric said. "Not again." The glow around them faded. The stones quieted. Later, after Syl had eaten and fallen asleep again, curled between the old broken altar and the embers of a fire Nyric barely remembered starting, Caelen drifted into dreams. But this time he didn't enter alone. He found himself standing in the mouth of a ruin that had never been built. The sky was black, the stars were burning, and a wolf stood in front of him, massive, silver-eyed, body a patchwork of flame and shadow. Its mouth opened, but no sound came, just a single thought pressed against Caelen's soul. "You will destroy the world, and you will remake it." Caelen stepped back, but the wolf didn't advance. It bowed. He woke with a gasp, sweat cold on his skin. He reached out instinctively toward where Nyric had been. The bedroll was empty. So was the den. "Nyric," he whispered. No answer. He scrambled upright. "Syl." Nothing. Just the fire. And one thing beside it. Pendant. A wolf fong, crusted in blood, still warm. Caelen's fingers closed around it. And for the first time since the tower, he felt truly, utterly alone. Chapter 13, Let the World Hate Me. The snow tasted of metal. Caelen only realized he was bleeding when his tongue found the inside of his cheek split open. Again. The jostling from the hover transport hadn't stopped for hours. His wrists were bound, ankles too. No inhibitor mask this time, just a heavy blindfold laced with psychic dampeners. He could feel it leaching into his skin, into his breath. He hadn't spoken since he was taken. There was no point. They weren't bounty hunters. Not mercenaries. These were trained, quiet, efficient. Every time he moved too fast, someone jabbed a stabilizer needle into his arm. They didn't ask him to behave. They made it inevitable. When the transport finally hissed to a stop, and he was dragged into a colder wind, Caelen felt something shift, not in the air, but in the earth. The ground remembered things here. Old things. Painful things. The blindfold was ripped off with ceremony. He blinked hard, vision reeling, and then froze. Stone. Walls. Pillars of steel buried in frostbitten earth, carved with long dead runes that glowed weakly beneath the ice. He had read of this place once. The shackled grounds. Officially decommissioned, quietly erased from maps and memory. But this was where the earliest resonant tests had been performed, where they had tried to bind Omega souls to Alpha cores without consent or symmetry. Thousands of attempts, hundreds of failures, a handful of monsters, and he had been here before. Roan stepped into view. A beta, tall and broad-shouldered, silver hair slicked back, uniform spotless despite the cold. His expression was neutral, but something in his eyes was too calm. The kind of calm that came with long years of compliance. "Welcome home," Roan said. Caelen said nothing. Roan gestured, and two guards stepped back, revealing a rusted door. They didn't open it. Roan did. The hallway behind it descended in a sharp spiral, the walls lined with what looked like cell doors, but smaller, narrower, not meant for adults. Each had a nameplate. Most were scratched out. Some were blank. "Walk," Roan said. Caelen's boots dragged through frost and rust. The walls grew darker. The temperature didn't drop, but the air thickened, weighted with old screams pressed into stone. Then they reached it, a chamber lined with screens. Roan gestured to a console. It flickered to life with barely a touch. The holograms that burst upward played without sound at first, blurred, staticky. Images of children, little boys and girls no older than 7, strapped to metal beds, white-robed officials hovering over them, casting glowing sigils that pressed down like shackles made of light. Caelen felt bile crawl up his throat. Roan's voice was quiet. You weren't just part of it, Caelen. You were the beginning. A new file flickered on screen. The date stamp was from 19 years ago, and the child, curled and shivering, skin pale as milk, was him. Eyes wide, markless, screaming. The footage showed the moment of contact, when a synthetic bond core was pressed to his sternum, when the resonance flared without containment, and when, in the next second, the surrounding glass exploded outward, impaling 3 researchers. Caelen's body convulsed on screen. Blood burst from his nose, his mouth, his fingertips. The screen cut to black. Then another played, and another, each worse than the last. Roan turned toward him, voice level. They tried to erase you, called you a statistical anomaly. But deep down, every Command Alpha knew what you were. Caelen shook his head. That wasn't me. I was a child. But not human, Roan said. Not in the way that mattered. You were the god's mistake. Caelen's knees hit the floor. He hadn't even noticed falling. The sound that left his throat wasn't human either. It wasn't a scream or a sob. Just breath dragged over broken glass. So I was never meant to be one of them. Roan crouched beside him. You were born to be the reminder, the control group, the thing they point to and say, this is what happens when we let Omegas believe they have will. Caelen shuddered. Tears streamed down his cheeks, unbidden, silent. He didn't fight the hands that came to bind him again. Didn't flinch when they clamped the collar back over his throat. He just whispered, then if I'm not a person, if I'm a disaster, then love me like one. Chain me, control me. I won't resist. Roan smiled faintly. Good. He stood. Your new alpha will be pleased. He's been patient. Caelen barely registered the words. He was staring at the screen still frozen above him. His younger self, mouth open in a silent scream, surrounded by fire and data logs and the faces of men who saw him as a question, not a child. He didn't even blink when Roan added, Sirius is on his way. The light dimmed. The guards began moving again. Somewhere far above, in the sick sky over White Moon, the wolves began to howl. Chapter 14, owned by the blood that should have dried. The restraints were gone. Not because Caelen had been freed, but because they were no longer necessary. They'd broken something softer, something deeper than flesh and bone. The days in the shackled grounds had done their work, and Sirius had done the rest. Not with fists, not with blades, but with control. Subtle, surgical, the kind of domination that didn't draw blood, because it didn't need to. Now Caelen walked under his own power. Through the corridors of the newly built Nexus Core, the heart of the Spirit Conduction Array, where Omega souls would be linked to the national ley line. Where Caelen's scar was meant to become a conduit for every obedient breath the state demanded. He was dressed in white, not the sterile white of hospital robes, but something ritualistic, soft fabric embroidered with subdermal runes, trailing across his shoulders like mock wings. His feet were bare. The marble beneath them was warm, prepared, purified, presented. Sirius walked just behind him, flanked by the scientific tribunal and 2 high priests from the binding order. They didn't look at Caelen with awe. They looked at him the way a hunter examines a trap he has spent years building. I always knew you would return, Sirius said quietly, as they entered the chamber. The ceiling rose into an open dome, threads of light webbing overhead. In the center, a massive rune array had been etched into obsidian, a circle as wide as a ballroom, pulsing with a heartbeat of cold flame. This was where the ley line would be anchored. Through Caelen. Sirius stepped forward, gesturing for him to enter the circle. You were never meant to be loved, he said. You were designed to be used. That's the shape of your soul. That's why no bond ever took. Caelen walked to the center. He said nothing. Sirius followed him in, slower now, his voice like silk caught on steel. I know you think the wolf scar makes you chosen, he said. But I was chosen too. By the state. By history. By design. Caelen turned his head slightly. You confuse power with being wanted. Sirius's smile cracked, just a little. Then he crossed the circle in a single step and grabbed Caelen's jaw. You don't need love, he whispered, leaning in. You just need direction. And with that, he bent and pressed his mouth to the mark on Caelen's collarbone. It wasn't a kiss. It was a claim, a reassertion of ownership. The rune beneath their feet flared. The array began to spin. The scientists murmured. Channels lit. The ley line cracked open like an eye. Caelen stood perfectly still. His pulse didn't race. His body didn't tremble. Only his eyes shifted. And then softly, then see it. Sirius froze. Caelen met his gaze and spoke again. See what happens when something is marked not by a man, but by a god. The mark ignited, but not in submission, not in obedience, in defiance. The rune beneath their feet sparked wildly, breaking its pattern. A second ring emerged inside the first, one the others couldn't see. A wolf's fang, drawn not with ink, but with intention. Sirius jerked back. What did you? Caelen raised his chin. You thought you owned the blood, he said. But you forgot what it remembers. Then he closed his eyes and let it remember. The rupture was instantaneous. The ley line spasmed. One of the scientists screamed as their channel stone shattered. A second dropped to his knees. The high priests reeled backward, clutching their heads as a burst of anti-resonance flooded the dome. The walls cracked. The array screamed. And then, a howl. Not human. Not natural. Not of this world. The far wall burst inward, stone and steel collapsing like paper. A blur of smoke and ash crashed through the chaos, claws glowing, eyes lit like twin embers in a storm. Nyric. He was bleeding. His coat was torn, but his teeth were bared. He didn't say a word. He just lunged. The first enforcer didn't even have time to scream before Nyric ripped through his chest. The second tried to raise a shield, too slow. Bone crunched. Flame followed. Sirius staggered back, drawing his blade, slashing wildly, but Caelen stepped between them. Not to protect. To end it. Sirius stopped mid-swing. He looked at him. Not like prey. Not like a weapon. But like a stranger. You. I don't belong to you, Caelen said. Then Nyric's hand caught Sirius by the throat and slammed him to the floor. The rest was silence, except the sound of the tower groaning. Cracks spread upward. The ley line screamed again, then snapped. The dome began to collapse. Caelen turned, staggering, catching himself on Nyric's arm. Their eyes met, but something in Caelen was changed, colder, calmer, like the scream had emptied him, and what remained was ash. Nyric opened his mouth, but Caelen beat him to it. I'm fine. His voice was flat, lifeless. Nyric frowned. Caelen. I'm fine, he repeated. Then he pulled free and walked toward the exit. Behind him, the tower continued to fall. Chapter 15. You left me, and I still chose you. The rain started slow, as if the sky was uncertain whether it had the right to weep. The narrow mountain path they followed was slick with moss and old bones, the cliff edges crumbling under each step. Thunder cracked somewhere deep in the belly of the valley, but Caelen didn't flinch. He hadn't flinched in days. He walked like a ghost made of ash and promise. Nyric followed, a few paces behind, soaked to the skin, his breath fogging out in the cold. Neither had spoken since the tower fell. Neither knew how, and yet, the silence between them was not quiet. It screamed. Syl was the only one who made sound, his quiet footsteps padding beside Caelen. His smaller frame hunched in a cloak 2 sizes too large. Somehow, impossibly, the boy had survived, found by one of the resistance cells after the Bounty assault, dragged from a burning crater with half his ribs shattered. He should have been dead. Instead, he watched them now with wide, 2 knowing eyes. "I thought you were gone," Caelen had whispered when they found him 3 nights ago. "I was," Syl had replied. "But you came back." Now they marched toward nowhere, with nothing but smoke and grief behind them, until the path narrowed again, an overlook of slick stone and weeping trees. Caelen stopped. The rain thickened. Nyric did too. Caelen didn't turn. "You could have told me," he said, voice hollow. Nyric's throat worked. "Told you what?" "That you were taken. That you didn't leave because you chose to. That the pendant was a signal. That you fought to get back." Nyric exhaled. "You didn't give me a chance." "No," Caelen said, finally turning, eyes burning through the rain. "Because I died that night." Nyric stilled. "I died when I woke up and the only person who had ever stayed long enough to touch me like I wasn't a weapon was gone." Lightning flashed above. Caelen stepped forward, fists clenched at his sides. "And you know what the worst part was?" he hissed. "It wasn't the loneliness. It wasn't the pain. It was that I still wanted to believe you had a reason. That I was worth a reason. I tried to come back. You left. I didn't. I was alone." Caelen's voice cracked, raw and sharp. "You left me, and I still chose you." Nyric dropped to his knees. Just like that. Not for dramatics. Not for pity. For truth. The mud soaked through his pants. Rain matted his hair to his face. He looked up at Caelen like a man trying to find God in the wreckage of war. "I didn't leave," he whispered. "They took me. When I went to find medicine for your fever, I woke up collared and buried. I had to bite through my own tongue just to get the rune to misfire." He bowed his head. "I don't expect forgiveness. But I'll die again if it means you'll look at me like you did. Just once more." Caelen's breath hitched. The wind picked up. He dropped to his knees, half falling in front of Nyric, hands shaking. "I waited," he whispered. "Like an idiot I waited. Every night, listening for your footsteps, hoping the mark would ache. But it didn't. You were silent. And I was already burning." His voice cracked. "I didn't just lose you. I lost myself." Nyric reached up, tentative, reverent. His hand cupped Caelen's jaw, thumb brushing a tear from his cheek. "I'm here now," he said. "I'm not leaving. Not unless you tell me to go." Caelen shook, then leaned in, and held him. There, in the rain, on the edge of a forgotten valley, surrounded by rot and ruin, he clung to the alpha who had once broken his trust, and the one who had taught him what trust was in the first place. The sob broke from his throat before he could stop it. "You're an idiot," he mumbled into Nyric's shoulder. "So I've been told." They stayed like that, breathing, forgiving, choosing. Behind them, Syl watched silently. Then, soft enough that only the wolves of the mountain might hear, he whispered, "Maybe it wasn't the packs that destroyed them. Maybe it was them, who chose to destroy the pack, for each other." Later, when the fire crackled beneath the shelter of an overhanging cliff, Caelen rose and faced the others. His voice was steady now, stronger. "I'm going back." Nyric blinked. "To White Moon." Caelen nodded. "But not to run, not to beg, not to hide." He stared out into the darkness, eyes glowing faintly with the mark of something older than blood. "This time, I'm going back to conquer." Chapter 16. the alpha who doubted his own teeth. The sanctuary had once been holy. Now it was bones and stone and the smell of rain-drenched rot. The old Howler's sanctuary, once the gathering place of the primal wolves before the purge of Accord, had been left to sink into its own forgotten myths. The wind blew through shattered stained glass teeth, and cracked statues watched with hollow eyes as rebels gathered beneath their gaze. Caelen stood at the center of it all. His white cloak was gone. He wore black now, plain, functional, no insignia. Nothing to bind him to a title he never asked for. Around him stood nearly 50 souls. Some cloaked, some armored, most thin with starvation and thicker with grief. Runaways, survivors, scars wrapped in skin, and a handful of alphas, eyes downcast, who had once worn state collars and now bowed their heads in quiet guilt. They'd come not because of propaganda, but because word had spread like fire through ash. The wolf-scarred Omega lives, and he was calling others to him. He hadn't said why. Not until now. The stone beneath his boots cracked as he stepped forward, light from the broken moon casting jagged shadows along the wall. "I'm not your alpha," Caelen said, voice loud enough to strike bone. "I'm not your savior. I don't have blue blood or legacy. I wasn't born with power. I was burned into it." Syl stood at the edge of the crowd, watching with quiet, wide-eyed awe. Caelen continued, "I've knelt before the ones who said I had no soul. I've begged the ones who said I had no name. I've bled for a kingdom that called my pain necessary." He raised his arms, sleeves slipping back to reveal the silvery bite mark glow tracing his shoulder. "But I survived. Not because I was chosen, but because I was left behind. And now," his eyes swept over them, "you don't need a leader. You need a reminder. I'm not your general. I'm not your god." He stepped down from the altar. "I'm the one who broke the leash and turned around." The room went silent. Then a single hand clapped. Then another. And then a wave of sound rolled through the sanctuary like thunder. Nyric didn't stay to hear it. He slipped out before the first cheer died down. One hand pressed hard against his ribs. The venom hadn't fully left him. Or maybe it had left something behind. Whatever it was, it gnawed now, constant, insistent. His mark pulsed off rhythm. Some days it felt like a second heartbeat. Tonight it felt like a countdown. He made it to the ruins of what had once been the old sanctuary's prayer chamber before the blood came up. Hot, violent. He dropped to one knee behind the wall and let it spill from his mouth, staining the dirt black. He shook. Alone. Unseen. Or so he thought. Does he know? Nyric jerked around, teeth bared, but relaxed when he saw who it was. Syl. The boy didn't flinch. He crossed the room slowly, knelt beside Nyric, and handed him a damp cloth. "He doesn't," Nyric muttered. "And he won't." Syl tilted his head. "Why?" Nyric looked away. "Because if I tell him, he'll stop. He'll hesitate. And he's so close to becoming something this world's never seen. I won't be the reason he turns back." Syl folded his arms, gaze sharp despite the tremble in his small frame. "You're bleeding through your ribs, coughing up spirit residue, and barely keeping your wolf inside its bones. And you think hiding that protects him?" Nyric said nothing. Syl leaned in. "You're not afraid of dying. You're afraid of failing him again." The words cut. Nyric's jaw clenched. Syl's voice softened, just barely. "You think you'll mark him wrong, that you'll crack him like the last one." Nyric looked at him sharply. Syl didn't blink. "I read the files," he said. "I know." Nyric's hand twitched. Syl reached out, placed a gentle hand on his bloodied shoulder. "You're not afraid of hurting him," Syl whispered. "You're afraid that even if you don't, you still won't be enough." The air between them was tight. Nyric didn't speak again. Syl didn't press. He just stood, leaving the cloth, and walked back toward the inner chamber. But just before he turned the corner, he said, He's already hurt for you. Don't let it be in vain. Across the ocean of ruin and rebellion, in a chamber lined with gold and war maps, Sarius stood before the High Council. The elders' faces were cloaked in shadow, but their voices were bright with venom. They've gathered. Yes, Sarius replied, at the sanctuary, like flies drawn to heat. And the Omega? Burning, Sarius said, and desperate. A beat. Then let them think they've built something. Sarius bowed his head. It's what we want, one of the voices said. Let them plan their revolution. Let them call others. Let them believe. Another voice, colder. Because when they rise, we will crush them all in one breath. Sarius smiled. I'll see to it myself. And far from the Tower of Power, the wolves began to howl again. Chapter 17, Trial by Fire, Chosen by Pain. The map was carved into a vertebrae, not parchment, not screen. Bone, weathered, cracked, still warm with old magic. Caelen traced the etchings with one thumb as Syl read the coordinates aloud beside him, voice hushed with fear. They call it the Trial Spire, Syl said. An old white moon satellite facility, buried under the southern ravine cliffs. Shut down years ago, supposedly, but there's chatter, real chatter, that they're still using it. Only now for one thing. Resonant strain testing, Nyric growled from across the makeshift strategy table. Syl nodded. They're trapping Omegas with partial or unstable marks in the central spire, running spirit frequencies through them, seeing who survives, who stabilizes, who doesn't. Caelen's fist curled. How many? Syl hesitated. 15. Maybe 20. Most are from the Ash Rebellion lines. Some taken during the early purges. They've been under psychic compression for weeks. Some longer. Nyric was already shaking his head. It's a trap. It's a grave, Caelen corrected. And they buried them alive. Nyric slammed his hand down. You can't lead this one. I already am. The air between them tightened. You think this is heroism? Nyric snapped, charging into a state-run crucible that was designed to destroy minds like yours? You know what high-frequency ley lines do to unsealed scars. My scar is sealed. Barely. Caelen stepped around the table, each word like a blade. I wasn't given this mark to hide in a cave and wait to be hunted. Every day I wear it, I remember what they made me for. So maybe it's time to remind them what I became instead. Nyric grabbed his wrist. Don't make me watch you die again. Caelen didn't flinch. Then don't look away this time. The trial spire loomed like a knife stabbed into the earth. Black and spiraling, the ruins of the facility jutted from the ravine like the ribs of some long-dead god. Thunder rolled low overhead, and the scent of ozone wrapped around the cliffs like a warning. They approached in silence, Caelen, Nyric, Syl, and 4 volunteers from the sanctuary's resistance cell. Among them were 2 Omegas with unmarked backs and tight eyes. Brothers. Survivors. The entrance had caved in years ago, but a service breach opened near the 4th rung of the outer shell. Just wide enough to crawl. Just dangerous enough to kill. Inside, the air vibrated. Literally. The closer they moved to the heart of the spire, the stronger the resonance became. First, it felt like a hum in the bones. Then it became something sharper, like needles threading through nerve endings, finding memories best forgotten. By the time they reached the first corridor, one of the volunteers had collapsed, eyes rolling back. Syl bent over him immediately. His bond core is fracturing. He's unsealed, Caelen said, breath ragged. Get him out. Now. But, I said get him out. Nyric grabbed the Omega's other side, hoisting him up. I'll take him. I'll bring the others back if they've started to slip. Caelen shook his head. You're not leaving. You can't stay. I'm not staying, Caelen said. turning to the group, eyes flashing. I'm finishing this. The group stared at him, then moved. Room after room, they passed through sigil-burnt hallways and collapsed stairwells, navigating by instinct and gut. And then, the core. They found them. The prisoners weren't chained. They were bound in worse. Psychic anchor rigs, straps of silverlight binding their limbs, while crystal nodes pulsed against their temples, siphoning thought, leaking pain. Some moaned. Some stared. One whispered, "Don't let them put me back." Caelen approached, hand outstretched. "I won't," he said. And then the room screamed. An ambient surge of psychic backlash exploded outward, knocking everyone but Caelen and Nyric to their knees. The frequency targeted Caelen's scar like a blade. It clawed at his mind, images, voices, nightmares slamming into his senses. He staggered, but stood, and walked straight into it. "Get them out," he yelled to Nyric. "I'll hold the wave." "No! Move, damn it! Caelen!" He turned, eyes glowing now, the mark on his back alight, his voice like wildfire. "You said I wasn't a god? Then don't let me be the one who has to live while they die. You think I want you dead?" "No," Caelen said. "I think you want to save me." He smiled, tired, blood already dripping from his nose. "But someone has to lose, Nyric. Let it be me." Nyric took one step forward. Caelen stepped back into the storm. And then, like fire, pain, he activated the mark. The reverse resonance flared out, shielding the rest of the team as they fled with the Omega survivors in their arms. Caelen stood at the center of it, alone. And then the wave collapsed inward. The last thing Nyric saw before the blast threw him from the chamber was Caelen, standing with arms wide, back arched, screaming not in pain, but in refusal. They found the survivors. All of them, alive, safe. Caelen wasn't among them. Nyric searched for hours, days. He clawed through rubble, tore through collapsed stone, screamed until his throat gave out. Until, at the bottom of the old soul well, a chasm used to store rejected resonance prototypes, he found it. A lock of hair, stained red, and a bone fragment, carved with one word in Caelen's handwriting. Freedom. Chapter 18. Nothing hurts like hope. Nyric dreamed in fire again. It wasn't the first time, but this one smelled of bone. He stood in the dream space of the old gods, deep within the ghost of the wolf deity's tomb, where the air did not breathe and the stars blinked like dying eyes. This realm had no floor, no sky, only cold, and the sound of slow, cruel heartbeats echoing from forgotten altars. And Caelen was there, not standing, suspended. His body hovered at the center of a column of white ash and knotted bone, wrists bound above him by threads of spirit glass, chest bare, eyes closed, lips parted in soundless chant. "Caelen!" Nyric's voice shattered against the silence. The chains did not move. He stepped forward, feet sinking into dust made of burned names. "Caelen, please!" Then Caelen's lips moved. The sound reached him, not as words, but as a scar drawn across the soul. "Stop looking for me." The words looped, over and over. "Stop looking for me. Stop looking. Stop." Nyric reached for him. Caelen's eyes snapped open, and every bone in Nyric's body screamed. Not in pain, in memory. The boy in the spire, the man in the snow, the Omega who had carved salvation out of ruin and marked his own body with a god's kiss, only to run from it because hope was too heavy to hold. "You're dying," Caelen whispered. Nyric froze. "The venom never left. You never told me." The bonds around Caelen pulsed. "So I made sure you wouldn't need to. I sealed my mind, locked myself from the bond, so you wouldn't feel it when I broke." "Why would you do that?" Nyric asked. "Why would you?" "Because I loved you more than I hated my own death." The air behind Nyric changed. A shadow stepped forward. Not God. Not ghost. Sarius. Beautiful, isn't it? Sarius murmured, hands clasped behind his back. Even now, the martyr finds a new stage. Nyric turned, growling. You shouldn't be here. I shouldn't be able to, Sarius agreed. But he opened this door the moment he used a god's name to seal a scar. That bond is flawed, Nyric. And through the flaws I crawl. The dream space twisted. The white column cracked. Caelen's face contorted in pain, though his mouth stayed eerily calm. Don't fight him. Don't wake me. Sarius circled Nyric slowly. You want him to live? He asked. You want his mind intact, his mark whole, his future free? Nyric said nothing. Sarius smiled. Then die. The word landed like prophecy. You burn out anyway, Sarius whispered. That venom is eating your spine. You're bleeding through your soul. What better purpose than to end as an anchor? Your death would seal the scar from the outside. His mind would stop tearing. He would live. I'm not trading my life to give him back a cage. This isn't a cage, Sarius said. It's a gift. I'm offering him peace. Nyric turned to Caelen again, watched his fingers twitch, watched his lips move in silent mantra. Don't look for me. Like it was the only thing keeping the chains from digging deeper. He dropped to one knee and wept, not from pain, not from fear, but because he understood. Caelen hadn't run because he doubted Nyric. He'd run because he'd believed in him too much. Nyric pressed his palm against the floor, if it could be called a floor, and whispered, You're not a burden. His voice broke. You're the only thing that ever made me feel whole. Then let me go. Nyric clenched his jaw. Let me take the fall. No. He stood and turned to Sarius. I'll die when I choose to. And if that moment never comes? Nyric's smile was cold. Then you'll learn what it means to fear a wolf who's already bled his god dry. The dream shattered. He woke gasping, lungs scraping, blood on his lips. Syl sat beside the bedroll, eyes unreadable. You saw him, the boy said. Nyric nodded. Syl didn't speak for a long time. Then softly, You're running out of time. I know. You haven't told him. He can't hear me. Not anymore. Syl stared into the fire, then looked up. If you don't tell him, if you die without letting him choose, then that's not a sacrifice. Nyric's throat tightened. That's betrayal. Far from the firelight, in a crystal sanctum beneath the bones of white moon, Sarius stood before a congregation of shimmering minds. The collective interface, the spiritual nervous system that would soon unite all resonance-capable Omegas into a single controllable hive of instinct, breeding, and silence. The Omega network. The first pods were ready. One of the engineers turned. And the pilot core? Sarius smiled. He's coming. Chapter 19. I don't need you to forgive me. Stonehell's root didn't echo. That was the first thing Caelen noticed as he woke in the dark. The steady, artificial silence of the underground fortress pressing against his ears like wet cloth. There were no wind tunnels here, no dripping stone, no howls from distant wolves. Only the sterile hush of buried survival. He blinked slowly, vision swimming, body aching from somewhere too deep to trace. His skin still throbbed where the mark had burned hot. His fingertips twitched, phantom echoes of resonance still crackling through his bones. Someone had stripped him down to simple cloth and bandages. His wrists were bruised. His throat was dry. He sat up slowly. The room wasn't a medical wing. It was too cramped, too barren. A side chamber repurposed for quarantine. On the far wall, a makeshift terminal blinked, displaying incomplete neural scan data. He was alone, but not for long. The door slid open with a mechanical hiss, and Syl stepped in. His face was pinched, pale beneath the shadows. He held a tin cup, steaming faintly. His boots were muddy, soaked through. "You're awake," Syl said simply. Caelen didn't answer. "You've been under for 3 days," the boy added, kneeling to hand him the drink. "Was anyone hurt?" Caelen rasped. Syl hesitated. "The evac was clean. You saved them." A pause. "But that's not what they're talking about." Caelen took the cup. Didn't drink. Syl stood. "They think you shouldn't be leading anymore." That Caelen expected. What he didn't expect was how little it hurt. "I didn't ask to lead them," he said, voice flat. "I know." Syl shifted, then added more gently, "But they followed you anyway, and now they're scared." Caelen looked up. Not angry, just tired. "I'm scared too," he said. He was dressed and gone by the next hour. Word had spread through the route by then. The scarred Omega was conscious but weakened. The mark hadn't flared since the collapse. And most importantly, he was quiet now, withdrawn. Even the others with scorched backs and fractured cores, the ones he'd once pulled from the brink, watched him differently now. Less like a symbol, more like a question. He found them gathered in the lower chamber. Medics organizing rations, engineers coordinating transmitter pings, volunteers relaying White Moon surveillance data. No one asked for his help. And then Nyric arrived. He didn't burst through the door. He didn't speak immediately. He simply stepped through the threshold like a shadow that had finally returned to its rightful corner. They locked eyes. Caelen didn't flinch. But he didn't step forward either. The murmurs died around them. Nyric's voice was rough. "You're alive." Caelen nodded once. "So are you." The silence stretched. "I tried to get to you," Nyric said. "I searched every corridor, every collapsed shaft. I know. I thought you were dead." "I was." Nyric took a step forward. Caelen didn't move. "I'm here now." Caelen's eyes softened, but only slightly. "I don't blame you," he said, and Nyric blinked. Caelen's next words cut sharper than any accusation. "I just don't want to believe anymore." Nyric's mouth parted slightly. "I'm tired," Caelen continued. "Tired of holding hope like it's not made of blades. Tired of waiting to feel safe beside the only person who ever made me feel seen." He exhaled, slow. "I'm not asking you to leave. I'm just asking you not to come closer." Nyric's shoulders dropped, like something heavy inside him had finally collapsed. Then quietly, "So what do I do?" Caelen looked past him. "Whatever keeps you breathing." That night he didn't sleep. Instead, he sat at the console in the far chamber, firelight flickering behind him, fingers trembling slightly as he activated the old record node embedded in the table. It beeped once. He stared into it. "My name is Caelen Merrow," he said. His voice didn't shake. "If you're hearing this, I've either crossed into resonance breach again, or I've lost control of my scar." He inhaled. "I need you to remember, I'm not afraid of dying. I'm afraid of being used." Another pause. "If my body becomes a vessel, if I'm no longer thinking, if my words aren't mine, end it. Don't hesitate." He swallowed. His fingers curled around the edge of the table. "I don't want to be a weapon." The light dimmed. "But if I must be one, let me choose what I destroy." He clicked the file shut. Didn't cry. Didn't break. Just sat there, still, until a soft voice broke the silence behind him. "I heard all of it." Caelen turned. Syl stood in the doorway. His cheeks were damp. "I'm going to White Moon," he said. "What?" Caelen stood abruptly, pulse spiking. Syl didn't back down. "I'm going to the inner circle. I know a way in. I've kept it secret. I used to be a carrier boy for one of the royal physicians." "Why?" Caelen whispered. Syl stepped forward, eyes hardening. "Because I'm the only one they won't kill on sight. I don't have a scar. I don't have a name. I'm just another forgotten beta." Caelen shook his head. Still, I'll go to the prince. The real one. Not the council. He lifted his chin. I'll offer myself. Caelen's mouth went dry. You can't. I can, Syl said. And I will. If they want a symbol, they can take me. His eyes burned now. But I want something in return. Caelen couldn't speak. I want your life. All of it. Even if you never love anyone again. Even if you never fight. I want you alive. He turned. I'll leave before sunrise. And then he was gone, leaving Caelen alone in the flickering dark, breath shallow, heart twisting with something far worse than pain. Hope. Chapter 20. They made me a god so they could burn me. The White Moon Palace had always loomed like a promise made of marble and silence. Its towers lanced through the sky like spears aimed at the heavens, every spire and arch lined with obsidian scripture that spoke of purity, obedience, and divine design. The guards wore silver-threaded armor. The light was too bright, the floors too clean. Everything about the palace whispered, "You are not welcome here unless you kneel." And Caelen Merrow did not kneel. Not anymore. He walked at the front of the silent procession, his boots echoing against polished stone, the burn scars on his back hidden beneath plain black cloth. 2 White Moon guards flanked him, spears in hand, but they didn't touch him. They didn't dare, because Syl had bought him this day. Bought it with his blood. Bought it with his life. You're not going to survive this, Syl had said only hours ago, his voice trembling as the tower loomed above them. I know, Caelen had answered. Syl gripped his arm. Then make it mean something. He hadn't cried. Not once. Not even when the royal physician pulled him aside, took a vial of blood, and handed it in silence to the prince's guard. Not even when the prince himself, young, cold, beautiful in the way a wolf was beautiful just before it bit, signed the decree of temporary passage. One day, no more. One day to speak. One day to burn. And now, here Caelen was, ascending the final marble staircase to the High Council chamber, where the fates of the world had always been decided by men who had never bled. The doors opened. He stepped inside. The chamber was vast, circular, columns rising like the ribs of a great beast, and at its center stood the throne dais, where 13 council members sat, and where Sarius stood just below them, armored in ceremonial black, hands clasped behind his back. Every alpha in the room turned as Caelen entered. He could feel them assessing him, weighing him, calculating how quickly they could erase him if he said the wrong word. So he said it first. You want a confession? Caelen's voice rang out, cutting through the cold like a blade. I'll give you one. He walked to the center of the chamber, turned, and faced the throne. I was born in a lab, bred for submission, trained to break. I was made to be quiet, made to be useful, made to be owned. His eyes swept the room. You called that order. A few gasped. No one moved. Caelen took a step forward. You put your hands on our throats and told us it was safety. You branded our backs and called it honor. You told us that love was a luxury for people whose bodies didn't carry the future. Another step. And then, when one of us dared to survive what you did, when one of us marked himself and lived, you panicked. He let the silence settle. You made me a god so you could burn me. Sarius stepped down from the dais. Careful, he said, voice like silk woven around a dagger. You're not here to make declarations. No, Caelen agreed. I'm here to be punished. The prince shifted on the throne above, unreadable. Caelen looked up at him. Tell me, what scares you more? That I refused to be marked? Or that I marked myself? That did it. The murmurs erupted. The council members leaned to each other. One of them, a high general with a braid of command stitched in his sleeve, spoke first. What are you proposing, Merrow? Caelen met his gaze. I'm not proposing anything. I'm not begging. I'm not bargaining. He pointed upward, toward the stained glass ceiling, where the white moon's sigil gleamed like frost. I'm just telling the truth. You don't want our compliance. You want our deaths to be dignified. You want us to burn beautifully, quietly, without cursing your name as the flames eat our flesh. He smiled. I won't give you that either. Sirius's voice sliced the air. Enough. The chamber fell silent. He turned to the prince. Your Highness, this is blasphemy. The prince stared down at them for a long moment, then gave the smallest nod. Sirius smiled. Very well. He turned back to Caelen, eyes burning. You wish to be the symbol? The god who rose against the hand that created him. His hand lifted. Then you shall burn like one. Caelen didn't move as guards seized his arms. He didn't flinch as the decree was read. He only looked up, past the spires, past the stained glass, past the carved history of his people's ruin, and whispered, Let them watch. They dragged him in chains to the Grand Plaza, called by another name now, Godfire Square. The platform was already built. Thousands had gathered, some to cheer, some to cry, some to believe for the first time that belief was still possible. Caelen's wrists were bound to the obsidian pole. The fuel was already soaked into the floor. The sky was gray, the wind too warm. He stood tall. They tied no gag. That would have spoiled the performance. From the edge of the execution ring, Sirius stepped forward. Any last words? Caelen smiled. I've already said too much. Sirius stepped back and gave the signal. The torches lowered. The crowd fell into breathless silence. And far, far beneath their feet, deep in the forgotten bones of the city, stone began to crack. Wolf claws tore through the rock. And Nyric, alpha of nothing, bloodied and burning, rose with the pack behind him. Chapter 21. You burned for me, so let me burn for you. The torch flame swayed like a dying prayer. Thousands watched. Thousands waited. And at the center of it all, atop a blackened obsidian altar with runes too ancient to mean anything human anymore, Caelen stood, arms chained, neck bare, his breathing even. He did not scream. He did not beg. He simply closed his eyes and tipped his face to the wind as if daring the heavens to blink. The Godfire Square had never known silence like this. Even the crowd, shouting seconds ago, now stood caught in their own disbelief. Because he didn't look broken. He looked ready. A boy who'd been called a god. An Omega who'd carved his own mark. A wolf waiting for the flame. Sirius stood at the edge of the platform, hand raised. His voice boomed above the hush. For defiance against divine order. Caelen didn't flinch. For rejection of natural hierarchy. The guards lit their torches. For leading the fractured toward heresy. The flames neared the fuel lines. The circle began to glow. We return him to the fire that bore him. A whisper of heat brushed Caelen's ankles. The first lick of flame curled up his boots. He did not scream. He smiled. And then, the mark ignited. Not with pain. With rage. A surge of silver light exploded from Caelen's chest, sending cracks spidering through the pyre stone. The flames reared back like beasts startled mid-feast. The fuel beneath his feet caught, but burned blue, then white, then reversed in a shockwave that shattered the execution ring into spirals of molten glass. The chains snapped, the air screamed, and the voice that rang out next wasn't human. It wasn't even Caelen's. It was something older, buried in marrow and memory, rising through his lungs like it had been waiting his entire life to be spoken. You made me for fire, but forgot who taught it to bite. 1,000 minds recoiled. Another 1,000 fell to their knees. The sky cracked, and the earth answered. Stone beneath the square shattered in a thunderous quake as claws tore through centuries of subjugation. Fangs glinted in the sunless gap below the city. Howls rose like storm winds as Nyric and his wolves, marked, bloodied, and starved for vengeance, erupted from the underworld and surged toward the altar. Caelen stood at the center of the ruin, barefoot, soot-streaked, marked from neck to spine in silver fire. His eyes glowed. Not blue, not gold, both. He turned, slowly, as Nyric broke through the flame ring and fell to one knee before him. Not out of fear, but choice. "You burned for me?" Nyric whispered, voice shaking. "Now let me burn for you." Caelen stared at him and reached out a hand. Nyric took it. Around them the wolves rose. Alphas bowed. Omegas sobbed. The faithless found something to believe in. Caelen raised his voice, the same God echo laced within it. "I was never your chosen. I was your mistake. But today," his voice shattered the air, "today I choose myself." The fire behind him flared again, this time not to consume, but to signal. The revolution had begun. Far above, in the citadel's highest tower, the White Prince watched through a spirit glass pane, hands clasped. Behind him, advisors screamed. Runes blinked. Council members scrambled. He didn't move. "Activate the chain protocol," he said. The chamber stilled. Now, a button was pressed. Across the nation, Omega bodies stilled, eyes fluttering, backs arching, old scars lighting like command circuits. A collective hum filled the ley line channels. The control net had gone live. Chapter 22. Every revolution starts with a lie. War doesn't begin with blood. It begins with silence. And that was all Caelen heard as he stood inside the war command chamber deep beneath Stonehell's root. His hands braced against a table carved from the skull of a fallen Alpha general. His pulse pounding like a countdown he couldn't stop. The room was a controlled storm of maps, transmitters, flickering ley line interfaces, and terse, snarled orders passed between snarling mouths. A dozen voices filled the space. None spoke to him. Not really. Because now, as the revolution sparked like dry tinder across the continent, the eyes that had once looked at Caelen with awe now carried a glint of doubt. He's unstable. He's marked by gods, not by logic. He's useful, but for how long? Kira was the first to say it out loud. She stood tall and cut from steel, her black hair bound in 3 thick braids of battle rank, silver-banded armor over broad shoulders, and a voice that sounded like it had been carved by blade rather than birth. "He shouldn't be at the head of the table," she said, addressing Nyric, not Caelen, though Caelen stood barely 3 paces away. "A weapon that shakes is a liability." Nyric's growl echoed across the chamber like thunder rolling down a cliff. "Say that again," he said. Kira didn't flinch. "He's still flickering with resonance. His scar isn't stable. Half the wolves don't trust his orders. Hell, some of them can't even process them because of the god tongue in his voice." Caelen said nothing, not because she was wrong, because she wasn't. His fingers still trembled when he reached too far into the war net. His dreams were riddled with screams. He still woke sweating, convinced his thoughts weren't entirely his own. But he also remembered the pile of burned collars, the fire in the square, the moment he had chosen not to die. So when Kira moved to the terminal, keying in a redirect to transfer his command protocols to herself, Caelen didn't react. But Nyric did. He was across the room in an instant, seizing her by the arm, slamming her against the stone wall with enough force to make the runes carved into it shudder. His voice was low, rough, deadly. "You touch his command line again," he said, "and I'll carve a bite so deep you'll taste moonstone in your marrow." Kira snarled. "You protecting him won't stop him from breaking." Nyric leaned closer. "You want to see breaking?" He bit his own wrist. Hard. The room gasped. Blood spilled across the floor, thick and dark, magic-laced. It hit the old command stone with a hiss, and the scent of iron and spirit fire filled the chamber. Caelen staggered. He felt it immediately, like a net settling over the chaos inside him, like someone pouring cool water over fire so hot it couldn't burn anymore. His mark stopped flickering. His thoughts aligned. It was an anchor. Nyric's blood, Nyric's pain, poured out for him without hesitation. Nyric turned, still bleeding, still glaring, and walked to Caelen. He didn't touch him. Didn't have to. "You will command," he said. "And anyone who doesn't follow?" He looked at Kira. "I'll bury." Kira didn't argue. Not that time. 3 hours later, the wolves surged. 3 coordinated strikes, one at the resonance core holding the Omega memory banks, another at the southern breeding camps, and the third at the leyline pulse control spire in the capital spine. Caelen stood at the center of the control room, voice smooth now, clear through the channels. "Squad 9, adjust trajectory. Pull northwest. The camp's shield is fracturing at the 5th rune. Spire team, hold until the 2nd spike. The resonance will crush you if you rush the 1st breach. Repeat after me. You are not the victims anymore. You are the fire." For a moment, the root felt like the heart of a god waking from sleep. But then, the channel blinked. The spire line crackled. Then, silence. "Main squad's gone dark," said one of the operatives, eyes wide. "I lost contact with 6 points." Kira rushed to the secondary display. "They're not jamming. They're gone." A third voice screamed, "We just picked up fallback transmissions. Location reads static." Then a new voice broke in. Not a wolf. Not from the network. But from a feed Caelen had hoped he would never hear again. Serious. The feed cleared. His face filled the screen, standing atop what looked like the ashes of a crumbled outpost, once a sanctuary node near the border. Behind him, smoke rose. Bodies. Too many. Too still. His voice was casual. Mocking. "The revolution came. We were ready." He stepped aside to reveal Omega corpses. Dozens. Some burned. Some mangled. Some still glowing faintly with Caelen's voice signature. A psychic echo imprint used to stabilize their minds. Nyric froze. Caelen couldn't breathe. Sarius smiled. "You think this game is yours now, but we've always let you believe in uprisings. Every revolution starts with a lie, Caelen." He tilted his head. "And ends in a grave." The screen cut to black. No one spoke. Caelen stared at the dark terminal. His hands were steady. His heart was not. But somewhere deep in his chest, under the ache and the guilt and the scream that wanted to tear him apart, something colder had started to burn. Chapter 23. The scar that screams when I touch you. The Moon Rift Valley bled quietly. It didn't wail like the cities. It didn't shriek like the battlefield. It simply lay open beneath the pale light, its soil soaked in 100 different names and 1,000 kinds of regret. White tents sagged under mist. The air stank of antiseptic and rot. Flies hummed like morning choirs. Caelen walked through the stretch of wounded without his coat. He wanted to feel the wind, raw and cold, cutting against his skin. Maybe if it hurt enough, it would drown out the static in his head, the broken resonance that hadn't stopped screaming since the failed strike. His steps dragged. He had memorized their faces already, the ones who were missing limbs, the ones who could no longer speak because their vocal cords had fried from over-screamed bonding ruptures, the ones who still flinched every time he passed, as if unsure if he was salvation or the curse that wore it too convincingly. He kept walking, until someone stepped in his path. An older woman, her eyes hollow, her clothes stained, her hands shaking, and in her arms, a soldier's band, burnt, folded, blood-dried. "Do you remember him?" she asked. Caelen didn't, not because he hadn't tried, but because he couldn't remember any of them anymore without choking on it. She didn't wait for his answer. "You told them they could live," she said, voice trembling, not with weakness but fury. "You told them they could fight and walk away from it. You told them you'd make it different. He opened his mouth, but she was already moving. The bowl hit his chest. Blood, still warm. It splashed across his shirt, down his collarbone, into the hollow of his throat. A soft clatter followed as the metal clanged to the stone path. You made them believe, she whispered, voice breaking. That's worse than making them die. She turned and walked away, and Caelen didn't follow. Couldn't. He stood in that courtyard of moans and flies, soaked in someone else's grief, unable to breathe. Then, he ran. The tent was dim. Medical red lights blinked across half-covered gurneys. It was the only space no one dared to follow him anymore. Caelen collapsed to his knees near a storage wall, chest heaving. And then, slowly, without hesitation, he reached behind him. His fingers curled and tore. His nails dug into the old scar, his scar, where the wolf god had marked him, where Nyric had poured blood to stabilize him, where every choice he had made still echoed like a prayer that wouldn't end. He dug deep. Silver light flared beneath his skin. He screamed, and then the tent flap tore open. Nyric barreled inside, dirt-streaked, eyes burning with panic and fury. Don't, he growled, rushing forward. Caelen, no. Caelen pushed him back. You said I could choose, he yelled, tears mixing with blood. Then let me choose silence. Let me end it before it eats everyone else. Nyric slammed him against the wall. Not hard, not rough, but enough to stop the shaking. His hand pressed over the bleeding scar. Body pressed flush to Caelen's. His voice ragged, hoarse, wet. You want to die, Nyric whispered. But you don't want to die alone. That's why you scream like this. Caelen sobbed. I can't carry them. I can't carry Syl. I can't carry the ones they burned because of me. You're not carrying them. I am. Caelen shouted. I was never a leader. I'm just a pretty lie with teeth. They didn't follow me because I was right. They followed me because I was the only option that looked better than death. Nyric didn't speak, just leaned forward and pressed their foreheads together. Then low and shaking, you don't get to die without me. Caelen's breath caught. Nyric's hand moved from his scar to his jaw, thumb smearing the blood, eyes never looking away. You want an excuse to end all of this? Nyric leaned in, kissed the corner of his mouth, then the dried blood on his neck, then finally, took his lips like the world was ending behind them and this was the only thing left worth tasting. Then let me be that excuse, Nyric whispered. Die for me, burn for me, but not like this, not alone. Caelen broke, not from pain, from being held. His hands clung to Nyric's collar. His body trembled, and for the first time in days, the scar pulsed not with agony, but with connection. And somewhere, outside the tent, someone screamed, not from emotion, from light. Caelen pulled away, breath ragged. Did you hear that? They both turned as another scream joined the first. Then another, and another. They ran outside. Across the valley, bodies were glowing. Not the living, the dead. Rows of corpses, resonant omegas, stored in protective magic-shielded chambers, were flickering like faulty lightning rods. Their scars, their cores, the very air around them, all burning blue, all resonating the same signal. A failed signal. Sarius. Caelen staggered back as one of the corpses jerked, limbs stiff, dead eyes glowing, mouth opening in an empty chant. Nyric grabbed him. What is this? Caelen's voice cracked. They're using the bodies. Why, how? The chain protocol, it wasn't to stop us, Caelen said, the horror rising in his chest. It was to use us. A medic screamed nearby. It's spreading. And then, on the horizon, the sky flickered once. A single rune, burned into the clouds, glowed across the city. 7 strokes. A countdown. The war had never truly been about survival. It had always been about possession. Chapter 24. I died the day you chose me. The war room reeked of lies. It wasn't the blood on the floor from the last transmission failure. It wasn't even the scent of stress and sweat from commanders pacing across the wolf-bone tiles. No, this was something deeper, something colder, something that had worn trust like perfume and now stank of betrayal. Kira stood in the center of the room, her wrists bound in copper-fused chains meant to dampen resonance. She didn't flinch when the guards brought her in, didn't speak as Caelen stared at her from the head of the table. But her eyes, they never once dropped. Why? Caelen asked. Not loud, not angry, just tired. Kira smirked, one corner of her mouth curling with mockery. You already know. The other wolves in the chamber were silent. Nyric stood against the far wall, arms folded. His breathing slow, measured, too calm for what he must have been feeling. He hadn't said a word since the evidence had been confirmed. Encoded transmissions traced back to Kira's private relay station, all leading to White Moon intermediaries. The price of peace. Surrender half the resonant Omegas. Bury the rest. In exchange, safe borders for Stonehowl's root and recognition as a sovereign state. You were one of the first, Caelen said. You bled beside me in the north. You dragged me out of a crater when my lungs collapsed. And that's exactly why I did it, Kira snapped, her voice cutting sharp and sudden. Because I know how this ends. Caelen stepped forward. You think they'll let us live? They'll let some of us live, she said. The ones who stop trying to play God. A silence settled. Caelen stared at her. You carry the same mark I do. The same blood. You saw what they did. You saw the pyres, the chains. Kira laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. And you think standing on those pyres made you holy? No, Caelen. It made you famous. You burned so well they forgot we were ever afraid of fire. Caelen's hands curled into fists. I trusted you. I never asked for your trust, she said. No, Caelen said quietly. You asked for my loyalty, and I gave it. He took another step. And you sold it. Kira tilted her head. Don't pretend you did all this for justice. You did it for him. Her eyes flicked to Nyric. You wrapped it in revolution. But all I see is an Omega trying to prove he deserves his alpha. Nyric stepped forward, but Caelen lifted a hand to stop him. Kira continued. Let's not lie. You want to save the world so badly. But in truth, you just want one person to stay. Her voice cracked. And the rest of us? We die so you can look noble doing it. I never wanted any of this, Caelen whispered. Kira laughed again. You're right. You didn't want it. You became it. Her voice dropped. You died the day he chose you. The rest of this? Just a funeral with better lighting. The room went still. Caelen inhaled slowly, then said the words he hadn't thought he'd ever say to someone who had once shared his scars. By order of resistance law, Kira of the Old Blood is found guilty of conspiracy and betrayal. Sentence: death. Kira didn't beg, didn't cry, just looked at him one last time and said, You're a god now, Caelen, so be ready to watch everyone burn. The guards dragged her from the room. He didn't follow, but he watched. And as the door closed, he whispered, too quiet for anyone else to hear. I thought we were the same. That night, Caelen sat alone in the corner of the strategy chamber, staring at a blank map. Nyric entered but didn't speak. He sat nearby, his body closer than usual, his scent grounding. For a long time they said nothing. Then Caelen finally whispered, She thought I did this for you. Nyric's jaw clenched. Did you? Caelen didn't answer, because the truth was a knot too old to untangle. I don't know who I am when I'm not fighting, he said instead. Nyric leaned forward. You're the one who kept going, even when it killed you. Caelen looked at him then, and saw something in his face that wasn't right. Too pale, too still. His skin was clammy, sweat beading at the hairline. And when he moved, just slightly, his fingers trembled. Caelen touched his wrist, felt the tremor, then looked into Nyric's eyes. "You're burning," he whispered. Nyric didn't deny it, didn't try to lie. He only said, "Don't ask me how long." Caelen's throat locked. "Why didn't you?" "Because you already carry too many ghosts," Nyric said. "You don't need mine whispering next." Caelen's eyes burned. "You should have told me." "I couldn't." "Why?" Nyric leaned close, resting his forehead against Caelen's. "Because if you looked at me like I was dying, I'd start dying." Outside, footsteps echoed through the tunnels. A runner burst in, eyes wide, voice breathless. "Message from the capital." Sirius received word from a defector inside. Caelen stood slowly. "Who?" The runner hesitated. "A resonant Omega. Name listed as Eri." Caelen's breath caught. Eri. The spy who once slept in the old dens and smiled too quickly. "What did he say?" The runner swallowed. "He said, Nyric has 24 hours. Maybe less." Caelen didn't turn around. Didn't need to, because Nyric was already standing behind him, breathing too shallow. And when he spoke, his voice was hoarse. "Then let's make it count." Chapter 25, The Alpha Who Forgot His Name. The snow came hard that night, thick, soundless. The kind of winter that buried footprints before they finished forming. The kind of silence that made you forget there had ever been sound. The outpost at Winter Ridge barely held under the weight of it. Makeshift walls trembled. Fires sputtered. The wind dragged ice claws across every tent like it was looking for someone to take. Caelen dragged Nyric's body through it. He wasn't breathing normally. He wasn't shifting properly either. Half bone, half fur. Claws still half grown from his hands. Eyes flickering between gold and void. His body shook with violent spasms. Resonance waves crashing out in erratic pulses that nearly cracked Caelen's skull every time they spiked. But he didn't stop. He pulled him into the clearing beside the river ridge, where the earth had frozen solid, and the air bit so hard it left skin cracked and lungs raw. And there Caelen dropped to his knees, forced Nyric flat onto the snow, pressed both palms to his back, and whispered the command spell. The scar obeyed. White fire flickered up from Caelen's fingertips, cool, now, frost-fed, and began to encase the mark like a sheath of ice glass. A containment lock, a temporary halt, the only thing strong enough to keep the wolf from shattering itself from the inside out. Nyric arched, a low growl ripping from his throat, but Caelen didn't flinch. "I know it hurts," he murmured, "but you told me once. Pain means you're still here." He leaned down, laid his cheek against Nyric's trembling spine. "Stay. Just a little longer." A sound nearby. Caelen turned. A small figure stood at the edge of the clearing, bundled in rags and two wide gloves. Lou, the orphaned resonance child. Big eyes, bigger silence. He stepped forward, voice thin. "Is he going to die?" Caelen didn't answer. Lou sat, cross-legged, and stared at the still burning scars on Nyric's body. "He saved me once," he said. "In the caves, when the breath hunters came. I was hiding under bones. He carried me." He sniffled. "I said I wanted to be like him, that I'd grow up and be big, brave." He looked up at Caelen. "Is he still brave if he forgets everything?" Caelen's throat closed. "He's still Nyric," he whispered, even if he wasn't." It took 3 hours for the seizures to subside. Another hour before the trembling stopped. And finally, Nyric opened his eyes. They were clouded at first, blank, searching. Caelen sat beside him, breath fogging the air. He didn't speak, didn't want to scare the moment. Nyric blinked. His mouth moved, Where am I? Snow Ridge, Caelen said softly. You collapsed. I locked your scar. You'll be okay. A long silence. Then, Nyric turned to him, eyes glassy, and said, Who are you? The words hit harder than any blade. Caelen didn't move, didn't cry, didn't scream. He reached out, slowly, and cupped Nyric's face with both hands. It's all right, he whispered. You forgot. He leaned in, resting their foreheads together. But I didn't. Nyric's breath stuttered. He didn't pull away, didn't understand. But some part of him, instinct maybe, leaned into the touch. Caelen wrapped his arms around him, held him, and whispered like prayer, I'll remember for both of us. By morning, the sky had gone clear, and Caelen stood atop the watchtower at the edge of the ridge, flanked by wolves, commanders, scouts. His voice, when it rang out, echoed like wind through a tomb. Nyric Ravell, he said, the Alpha who carried us through every storm, has given his memory so that we might keep our future. Silence below. Not in rejection. In mourning. He gave everything. And now I will give everything back. He turned toward the horizon. Toward the spires of White Moon Citadel rising in the far distance like the ribs of a dead god. I don't need his permission to love him. He raised the horn. Blew it once. The call rang sharp. Caelen's voice followed, strong enough to shake the snow from trees. For him we rise. The wolves howled, and the mountain heard. Chapter 26. I will burn the city that burned you. The snow outside White Citadel wasn't white anymore. It had turned the color of bone wash and blood, soaked by days of fallen wolves, torn limbs, shattered resonance anchors, and the heat haze of magic that never seemed to fade, no matter how many lay dead beneath it. Caelen stood at the ridgeline above the last encampment, the city's walls looming high ahead, distant yet near enough to taste in his throat like iron and ash. His cloak dragged behind him, torn in 3 places, soaked in blood that wasn't entirely his. He hadn't slept in 2 days, hadn't spoken in 1. Below him, 3 units of wolf-born fighters moved through the broken outer defenses, but the formations were scattering. The White Citadel's response had not been just violent. It had been prepared. The Blood Moon cannons had activated on the second night. They didn't fire traditional weaponry. They shattered mines. Resonant mines. Omega mines. Lou had been one of the first hit. Caelen hadn't even seen it happen. 1 minute the boy had been running beside the munitions cart, humming some half-remembered song about fur and fire, and the next, his body had dropped. No scream, no shift, just collapsed mid-step like the strings had been cut. Now he lay at the base of the ridge, curled like a pup, blood leaking from his nose, his chest unmoving, the resonance scar over his heart glowing faintly. The only thing still trying to pulse even though his soul had already gone quiet. No one dared move him, not without Caelen's permission. But Caelen just stood there, his fingers trembling. He didn't cry, couldn't. There was no grief left big enough to hold this. Not after Kira. Not after Nyric. Not after watching every future he had tried to build die one by one. He walked down the slope in silence, his boots crunching what remained of the frost. He stopped over Lou's body, kneeled, laid his hand gently over the boy's hair, still tangled and soft. He believed in me, Caelen whispered. No one answered. No one moved. I told him he'd make it, that I'd make sure of it. He looked up, across the cratered battlefield, beyond the broken wall, to the citadel, the city that had built collars and called them protection. The city that had trained executioners and named them alphas. The city that had taken Nyric and turned him into a blade. Caelen stood. Blood dripped from his fingers. He unfastened his cloak, let it fall into the mud beside Lou's body. Then he reached into the inner seam of his armor, pulled free a strip of woven crimson, a relic from the wolf god's shrine. One that hadn't been meant for battle. He bit his palm open and pressed the cloth into the wound, staining it with his blood. Then he tied it around the war banner's staff and lifted it high above his head. The resonance rippled through the air like thunder caught in a scream. "You want a god?" Caelen said. The army turned. Eyes widened. He began to walk. Slowly, deliberately. Each step toward the city gates shook the field. "You called us weapons. You called us dangerous. You called us broken." He bared his teeth. "I call us ready." The blood moon cannons activated again, runes pulsing in midair. Caelen didn't stop. He reached into his resonance, too deep, deeper than was ever safe, and ripped it open. A scream of light burst from his spine. A flare of God touched fire, white hot and burning through every mind within range. But this time it didn't destroy. This time it united. Wolves behind him steadied. Howls echoed in synchrony. A cry from 1,000 throats, as if they'd been waiting for the moment when their pain finally had something sharp enough to aim at. Caelen pressed the bloody banner to the ground. The spell circle beneath his feet ignited. A gateway opened in the dirt, a resonance tunnel, torn directly through the Citadel's defense field. And Caelen, shirtless, blood-soaked, half-marked with every failure he carried, walked into it like it was a road carved by vengeance itself. His voice carried across the field. "He died believing I'd win." He looked to the sky. "Let me prove him right." The banner burst into flame. The gates exploded. And from the tower high above, Sirius watched from behind silver glass panels, a slight smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Begin Phase 7, he said. Behind him, the figure in chains stirred, eyes blank, scar blazing. It was Nyric, but not the Nyric who had bled to protect. Not the Nyric who whispered apologies into Caelen's ear. This one wore a collar of resonance wire, and his eyes were void of memory. Caelen didn't know. Not yet, but he would. Soon. And when he did, only one of them would walk out of the fire they'd both built. Chapter 27, He Forgot Me, but I Never Let Go. The Hall of Memory was built from glass and silence. It spiraled upward from the bones of the white citadel like a crown of mirrored ribs, each panel etched with the screams of the fallen, every surface humming with captured thought. And at the center, high upon the final throne tier, stood Caelen, his breath fogging the air like frost in an open wound. He was alone, except for the monster wearing the body of the man he loved. Nyric stepped forward. No, not Nyric. Not anymore. His movements were too smooth, too calculated, like a marionette pulled on divine strings. His eyes were hollow, glassy, rimmed with burning sigils that pulsed in time with the rune towers embedded in the walls. His resonance mark blazed with raw overload, too white, too bright, too controlled. And at his back, Sirius stood, arms crossed, watching with the contentment of a man unveiling a masterpiece. "He's perfect," the commander said. Caelen didn't look at him. His eyes never left the wolf. "You broke him." "I set him free," Sirius corrected. "He was built to be this. The vessel, the blade, the god that walks." Nyric's claws extended with a soft crack of bone. Caelen didn't move. Sirius smiled wider. "Isn't this what you wanted, Caelen? A world where Omegas don't beg, but burn? You gave him that power. You forged it with your kiss, with your mark." Nyric snarled and lunged. Caelen didn't dodge, didn't scream. The claws sank into his shoulder, ripped through skin, tendon, bone. The pain was blinding, but Caelen's hand found Nyric's chest, right above the core, right above the scar that used to bind them. He whispered, "I remember." Nyric froze mid-strike. Caelen leaned close. "You knelt for me in fire. You told me you weren't my alpha. But I never needed one. His blood soaked the floor. Nyric's teeth hovered inches from his throat. But you were mine. I chose you. He closed his eyes and let the resonance open. The air split. The chamber groaned and then imploded. Caelen wasn't standing on stone anymore. He was somewhere else. Somewhere deeper. Somewhere older. A space of spirit and breath and memory, made not of walls but flame. The wolf god's domain. The place between life and madness. Nyric stood across from him, no longer armored, no longer bound, just bare, bruised, wild, and afraid. His voice, when it came, was young. Where am I? Caelen stepped forward. This is your heart. Nyric blinked. Why are you here? Caelen smiled, broken and beautiful. Because you forgot me. He raised his hand. And I never let go. The fire surged, revealing moments like torn photographs. Nyric kneeling in fire. Nyric laughing in the woods. Nyric pressing his bloodied hand against Caelen's scar. Nyric saying, "Don't die alone." Caelen's voice trembled. They stole you, made you a weapon, a cage. But I've never loved you for your sharpness. Nyric shook. Caelen stepped closer, until their foreheads touched. I loved you because when I broke, you held me, even when it hurt. Nyric's hands clenched. His voice cracked. I don't want to kill you. You already did, Caelen whispered. The day you stopped being you. Silence. Then, a roar ripped through the dreamscape. Reality crashed back in. They were in the chamber again. Nyric was trembling. Caelen still bleeding. Sarius shouted something in the background, but the words were smoke. Because Nyric looked down and wept, not loud, but deep, like the bones of the world breaking. And then, in a single shattered breath, he raised his clawed hand, pressed it to his own stomach, and drove it inward. Caelen screamed. Blood, resonance, light. Nyric's body seized, but his eyes stayed his. I remember, he said, voice cracking. And I'd rather die than forget again. He ripped the core free. The wolf god's soul poured out like starlight ruptured. And Caelen caught it, held it between his hands. The resonance flame burned. And Nyric smiled, soft, pained, real. You won't survive this, he said. I never meant to, Caelen answered. Nyric slumped to his knees, breath failing. Caelen lifted the blade of the wolf god. Nyric looked up at him. His last words, I don't want to be your alpha. And Caelen whispered, you were never mine to own, just mine to love. He brought the blade down. The screen went white. Chapter 28. I killed the only one who chose me. The citadel shuddered. Not from war, not from gunfire or siege, but from something older, something deeper. A heartbeat, one born not of muscle, but resonance. A new god, crawling from the wreckage of 1,000 broken names and one last sacrifice. Caelen staggered through the final corridor alone. The walls vibrated with psychic static, sparks leaping between cracked rune plates and shattered relay stones. In his hands, he carried the heart of a god, Nyric's core, still pulsing faintly, soaked in light and memory. Pressed against his own bleeding scar, it flared with every step he took. Behind him, the battlefield lay in ruin. Sarius was already waiting at the top of the spiral dais, clad in his final ceremonial armor, polished as if that could hide the madness underneath. You're late, Sarius said, his voice sharp, clipped. The terminal awaits a true mind, not a martyr. Caelen didn't answer. He climbed the last steps. The Lingchi terminal core towered above them, its lattice of memory threads pulsing like the veins of an artificial god. From its center rose a throne of thought steel, bound with crownless chains, where once Omega minds had been turned into engines of obedience. Now it would take one final mind. Willingly. Don't do this, Sarius said, not mocking now, not smirking, almost tired. You die here, and your movement dies with you. The wolves tear each other apart without a name to follow, without a myth. Caelen turned to him. His eyes were bloodshot, empty, full. I'm not a myth, he said softly. I'm the boy you tried to erase, and I remember everything. Then, without warning, he moved. Not fast, not clean, but with the inevitability of grief. The blade he carried, Nyric's wolf-bone dagger, sank into Sirius's chest, slipping past armor, past memory, into the very center of the man who had spent his life rewriting everyone else's. Sirius gasped. Caelen leaned in. You didn't kill us, he said. We just stopped performing the story you wrote. He twisted the blade. Sirius dropped, and Caelen turned to the throne. They watched him ascend from every city, every outpost, from the ash fields, from the shattered dens, from the craters once called breeding sanctuaries. The wolves watched, as Caelen Merrow, blood-soaked and bright-eyed, climbed into the Lingchi core and slit open his own chest with the ceremonial blade. They screamed when the resonance ripped through him. He didn't. His scar flared once, then split. The wolf god's core sank into him, and his voice, no longer human, no longer singular, echoed across every bonded mind in the world. You were told you were born to be touched. His voice was thunder. You were told your body belonged to the ones who were stronger. That pain meant love. That silence meant safety. The chains around the core shattered. You were told you needed them. The throne burned, and still he spoke. But now I tell you, you were never broken. They just feared what you'd be when you finally stood. In a chamber far below, Nyric collapsed to his knees, memory flooding back, breath catching. His voice cracked as he screamed, Caelen! But it was too late. Caelen's body dissolved into resonance fire, his soul becoming the spine of a new system, one not bound by hierarchy, by breed, by control. Across the land, every Omega scar blinked once, then faded, gone. The link severed, the domination ended, and in its place, a single whisper, spoken to each of them, privately, intimately, like a vow. There are no more alphas, no more betas, no more labels built to keep you kneeling. There is only you. Later, much later, in the ruins of the old mountain range, in a quiet cottage carved into the cliffs of Munrif's edge, Nyric sat by the window and stared at the stars. He didn't remember everything. Some days he didn't remember much at all. But he remembered fire. He remembered kneeling in it. For someone who had smiled even as the world ended. Each year a boy came up the trail, left no name, just a letter, always folded neatly, tucked beneath a small pile of stones beside the door. Nyric never opened them. He didn't have to, because every time, the envelope bore 3 simple words, etched in ink and blood. I remember you. Chapter 29. The silence that still remembers you. The mountains didn't speak, but Nyric often imagined they were listening. The wind carved stories through the stone peaks of Moonrift Ridge, whispering through pine-needled forests and leaving traces of frost like old fingerprints. Here, in a crooked wooden house set against a cliff's edge, Nyric lived alone. He didn't know why he stayed. He didn't know when he'd come. But every morning he opened the shutters at the same time, brewed the same bitter tea, sharpened the same dull knife, and sat at the same wooden table, listening to the wind knock gently on the window pane as if asking to be remembered. Sometimes it brought dreams. In those dreams he ran, always barefoot, always breathless, chasing flashes of silver through trees too bright to be real. The figure he pursued never looked back, but Nyric felt the pull, the ache, the certainty that if he reached him, everything would make sense again. Every time he got close, the dream would shatter. He would wake up with his throat tight, his nails sunk into the mattress, and a name on the tip of his tongue. Never spoken, never remembered, and yet always there. On the first morning of every month, a child came. He never knocked, just left the same thing, tucked neatly inside the stone bowl by the door. A letter, handwritten, sealed with wax that always smelled faintly of cedar and iron. Nyric would wait until the sun hit the ridge. Then he would open it. The paper was always the same. So was the handwriting. But the contents? Only one name, Caelen Merrow. He never asked who the child was. Never needed to. Somewhere in the back of his fragmented mind, he knew. The boy's hair was pale, his eyes too old. He carried the kind of silence only those who had been saved by love could carry. The letters were not a burden. They were gravity, something to keep Nyric from floating too far from himself. He'd read them aloud just once. Every time. Caelen Merrow, he would whisper. Then again. Caelen Merrow. And once more, voice trembling. Caelen Merrow. And for a few hours after that, the world would feel familiar. He didn't know why the name made his chest ache. Didn't know why it tasted like smoke and honey and something he'd once died for. But he read it. Every time. Because the silence that followed remembered something he didn't. That winter, the child came late. Snow blanketed the trail for days, and Nyric found himself staring at the empty bowl for longer than usual. His fingers twitching toward memories he couldn't touch. When Liro finally arrived, his boots were soaked, his cloak tattered. But his eyes burned with urgency. He didn't carry a letter. Just a small cube data stone tech from the pre-rebellion ruins. I found it in the archives, the boy said, barely above a whisper. Buried under ash in the eastern tower. He placed it in Nyric's hand. It's his voice. Nyric blinked. The stone pulsed once. Softly, like a heartbeat. He didn't ask who. He didn't need to. Liro turned to leave, but paused at the edge of the path, the wind whipping through his scarf. I was 5 when he found me, the boy said. I remember thinking he was the loneliest person I'd ever seen. He looked back, but he smiled like someone who had already forgiven the world. Then he disappeared into the mist. Nyric sat alone on the steps, stone in hand. He stared at it for a long time, pulsed again, once, twice, and then a voice filled the air. Low, soft, scarred, familiar. If this reaches you, it means you lived. Nyric didn't breathe. The world held still. Maybe you don't remember me. Maybe you don't remember yourself. But I remembered for both of us. The voice shook. I loved you before the fire. I loved you through it. And if I'm nothing but ash now, then I loved you with that too. Nyric closed his eyes. The wind howled. Say my name, the voice whispered, fading. Even if you don't know why it hurts. Then silence. But the name rose in Nyric's throat like prayer, like instinct, like everything he'd ever lost. And for the first time since the war, he spoke it aloud without a letter to guide him. Caelen, his voice broke. Merrow, and the silence that followed did not ache. It remembered. Chapter 30, if you find me in a dream, just say my name. Night came quietly to the ridge. No drums, no wolves, no resonance screaming in the air. Just the hush of pine needles shifting in wind, the breath of snow melting into the cracks of old stone, and a fire guttering low in the hearth of a crooked cottage. Nyric sat alone. The data stone pulsed once in his palm. Still. He held it against his chest, fingers trembling, not from cold, but from the echo of that voice, the one that hadn't belonged to any living man, not anymore. The one that had said his name like it was the last word worth dying for. Say my name, even if you don't know why it hurts. He closed his eyes and fell, not into sleep, but into memory, or maybe something deeper. The forest stretched around him, just as it had in every dream before. Branches dripping with moonlight, leaves painted in shades no language had ever bothered to name, the scent of rain long since past. But this time Caelen didn't run. He stood beneath the silver wash trees, barefoot, bare-chested, wearing nothing but the shimmer of starlight and the scar over his heart. His eyes met Nyric's. He smiled. "I always said you were stubborn," Caelen murmured. "Took you long enough." Nyric stumbled forward. The ache hit first, deep in the chest, under the ribs, like something old breaking open. I couldn't." "You don't need to remember," Caelen interrupted gently. "You just needed to come back." The wind passed between them, a breath, a thread. Their resonance flickered, just once, between bodies, the thinnest filament of gold stretching from Caelen's collarbone to Nyric's fingers. He reached up, touched Nyric's face, and suddenly everything was warm, not just skin, but memory, laughter echoing across the riverbanks of youth, kisses stolen behind frost-covered tents, bloodied hands clutching each other in fire. "I waited," Caelen said. Tears slipped down Nyric's face. "I couldn't. I forgot." "You remembered enough to come here." Caelen stepped closer, until their bodies almost touched, until breath could tangle. "You don't need the past," he whispered. "You just need the part of you that chose me." Nyric shook his head, throat raw. "I killed you." "No," Caelen said softly. "You set me free." He placed Nyric's hand over his own chest. "Feel it," he said, and Nyric did. Not a heartbeat, not a pulse, but a knowing, like the final page of a story you already lived. "I'm not real anymore," Caelen said. "Not in your world." "Then take me here," Nyric begged. "Let me stay." Caelen smiled, eyes shining with grief and love. "No, Wolf," he said. "You have to live." The forest trembled, faded. Cracks tore through the dream like shattering glass. "Don't go," Nyric cried. Caelen leaned in, pressed his lips once, softly, to Nyric's temple. "If you find me in a dream," he whispered, "just say my name." Then he was gone. The light, the warmth, the forest, all of it. Nyric woke with a howl still caught in his throat. It tore through the morning like a blade. He gasped, chest heaving, hands trembling. He looked down, and there, etched across the bones of his fingers, glowing faintly beneath the skin, a mark, not a name, not a scar, just two mirrored crescents, one waxing, one waning. He touched it gently. No pain, just that same old ache. And something new, hope. Outside, the world moved on. The council was gone. The ranks dissolved. The resonance cast no longer bound bodies in chains. But peace was a fragile thing. No one knew if it would last. Nyric stood at the edge of the mountain, wind curling around his ankles, sun just rising beyond the crags. Somewhere below, people rebuilt. Somewhere inside, the scar of memory lingered. And in the wind, so soft it could have been imagination, a voice whispered, "You're not forgotten. You are proof that I lived." He closed his eyes, and for once he smiled.